All right, we're live. All right, hi everybody. So I just thought we'd do a nice friendly little stream, and we have with us Paulogia, Max Kolbe, ShannonQ, and Holy Koolaid. So I asked in my community tab, which I've never used before, for you guys to send us some questions, and there's a bunch of questions in there. So we're just gonna go through them and kind of just shoot the shit and have some fun. So, hello everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. All right. So we'll go with the first question. Well, the first question was Shannon. She asked, why am I so much better at everything than you?
I want to know.
Yeah. Well, that's not hard to do, Shannon. It's a pretty low bar.
There, but sure.
So from the next, we have Autistic Owl Fan. How do religious people know their religion is the true one? So I figured we'd give that one to Max, since he is religious.
Oh, well, I mean, I think there's multiple paths to getting there. I investigated the claims of my religion and decided they were more valid than the claims of other religions, and that they made the most sense to me. That's, and I could go into all these things, but to me, choosing a religion is like choosing a political candidate to some extent. Not the same, but you're deciding who you believe and what you believe. That's what you're doing, and what evidence makes the most sense to you. I landed on Orthodox Christianity because I thought it was pretty obviously the valid version of Christianity, and so that's what I was looking for, because it was the oldest and the most stable and the most unchanging. So that's how I made my call. Well, I mean, it's like asking, was Ronald Reagan a good president? Well, I could talk for hours as to whether or not he was one. In the end, you make your own decision as to what you think is true.
So what was the most convincing thing to you? Like, if you had to narrow it down to one thing that was most convincing to you, Max, what would that be?
Well, when you say was or is, because what convinced me originally was I became convinced that we evolved to be spiritual, and that we seem to get sick if we deny our spirituality. So that's what got me started. At this point, what I find most convincing is, other than the historical evidence, but that's getting more specific, it is just so clear to me in multiple areas of sciences that there is evidence that there's an afterlife, and evidence that something intelligent is running the universe. So, I mean, I don't know. The one that's hot right now is the digital physics theory, which, of course, could be false. But, I mean, there it is. And that theory matches so well with what Christians like me have thought for a long time. Go look at the digital physics theory, man. We're living in a simulation. What's running the simulation? We think it's a guiding intelligence called God, probably specifically the Logos that Jesus is. But, you're going to find whatever you find convincing. I hear from people all the time what they find convincing, and it's a different answer. So what can I say?
Fair enough. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
I guess my question there was more along the lines of, to Max, what he listed kind of gets you to theism, not necessarily to Orthodox Christianity. And I think that's what the original question was more regarding. If one is a theist already, how is one?
All right, so there's the thing, and I really do think that you have to accept that it's, that it's rational to think that there's a God at all, because if you can't, if you don't accept that, then of course the Bible's a garbage book. Why the hell are you reading it? It's not even very good. Ditto the Quran and all of them. But if you think something is running the universe, then it becomes a question of, well, how do we find out about that?
I agree with that, though. The part where you said that they're not even that good.
No, dude. I read the Bible as an atheist, and I didn't like it at all. I didn't see why you would like Jesus. I didn't see why you would like God. I didn't see why you would like. I mean, really, the Greek mythology was much more entertaining.
That's fascinating. Why did you change your perspective then, Max?
Well, I'll tell you honestly, I had no idea what a God was in the first place. So I would sit there and read it and I go, why does anybody believe this? And yeah, it's not all that compelling. I mean, some of it is, right? But I mean,
yeah, that's beautiful components to it, definitely. But it's
well,
interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly how I saw it.
Oh, it's interesting that you say that. We've talked before, you and I, and I've never heard you say that you didn't, that initially when you read it as an atheist, you didn't find it compelling.
No, in fact, I didn't even like Jesus.
You didn't even like him.
Mm-mm.
Interesting. But you came around because you garnered a different perspective of what you believe
What
God
he was doing and what he was saying. I got a very different view of what he was doing and what he was saying. I mean, the concept of Jesus is not that he was this guy who died and he's God. The idea of God is that there's an intelligence running the universe.
Right.
And that intelligence, the Christian view, now we're going straight to Christianity. Okay, the Christian view, understood at the what I think is the most intellectual level, is that Jesus is the divine logos. The logos is things like logic, mathematics, geometry, and ideas. All that stuff that makes the universe run the way it does, is actually intelligent and decided to become a person, and decided he needed a mother and he needed to be conceived, born, and died. And so the logos becomes a human being, one of us. And therefore, if that happened, and he truly is that all powerful, I mean, he's math itself, he's logic itself. He decided to become human to visit us and give us a message, quite a few messages. And if you're seeing him as an all-knowing, all-powerful being who's speaking, all of a sudden, a lot of the things he's saying make a lot of sense, and the way people react to him makes more sense.
So it's a perspective shift.
When you say
it is a perspective shift, it's a total perspective shift. And I'll tell you about on the Bible thing. Now, the Orthodox Christians, major there are 4 or 5. They all have this thing called the deposit of the faith, which is basically the code cracker that tells you how to interpret what you're reading. I know a lot of, fundamentalists and evangelicals and all that. You don't tell me what, I don't want your doctrines or dogmas, but a doctrine is a teaching. A doctrine is a teaching or a theory, and a dogma is just, we hold this to be axiomatically true. And it adds coherence to how you look at the Bible. You don't just read it. You get the history. You get what the great doctors of the church have said about it as they've studied it over the centuries, and the things that have worked over time, and say, what does this mean? We've had these debates for 2,000 years over various Bible passages. Well, the Orthodox, they have ecumenical councils and they settle those, and it's much more stable. Orthodoxy is just a lot more stable. I'm rambling. I need more wine.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt really quick because Savage Atheist gave us a super chat. So thank you, Savage Atheist. And he asked,
Savage.
Yeah, and he has a question for you, Max, in a super chat. He says, "Do you agree morally with all parts of your religion? And if not, how do you reconcile and maintain your beliefs?"
All parts of my religion. Well, that's big, okay? Because my religion is based in something called Thomist natural law. And like I said, thousands of years of analyzing the scriptures and the traditions. And I can't say I even know it all. But how do I think all parts of it are true? I mean, yeah, but there's always give and take as to how you interpret things, what they mean, all that. I mean, I guess I'm not sure what to do with the question exactly. I keep finding that what the church teaches is true, and that's actually the truth. But within the church, there's always disagreement over how does salvation work? How do we actually see human sexuality that's deviates from what we think is the ideal? How do we address these issues? Those are always subjects of discussion among Christians. So,
is there anything that the church teaches that you found that you don't agree with?
That I don't agree with. I have a trouble sometimes with the church using the word evil to describe things that to me are more minor, like whacking off or being gay or whatever. The word evil is just a freight train of I mean, within the theological framework of which they're using the word evil, it doesn't have the same connotation. But it's hard sometimes when you look at stuff like that. But I think when I got in, I was looking for what I could get spiritually out of it. I think what I like to say is the benefit of orthodoxy is that even if you disagree with the orthodox position, you know what you're disagreeing with. You have a base in which to say, you know what, I think the church goes a little too far here, or I think we're not reading it right here. I don't know. Did that make sense? Or am I just bad?
Yeah, no. I guess it was kind of a lead up question where I was more thinking along the lines of, do you find anything that the church teaches that you disagree with scientifically?
No, I don't. I can't think of a single one. There's scientific evidence for everything the church teaches, so I don't know.
The lead up to that would be, if you did find something that scientifically disagreed with scripture, how would you respond to that?
With skepticism and critical thinking, just for start. I'm going to repeat that our
Bible or of the claims.
Either one. Of the science or of the science itself, I would immediately apply skepticism to any proposed science that came out, which is the logical thing to do. Just because you call it science doesn't mean it's right. But it's really hard because I come from the religious tradition that says God's running the laws of physics and probability. If God's running the laws of physics and probability, then it's really hard for there to be a scientific conflict. The only conflict I can think of is when moral issues come up, like with stem cell research or abortion or sex matters, or, when you should or shouldn't do drugs. I mean, scientifically, there isn't much in my particular branch of the faith that you can come up with that's going to be in conflict. God runs the laws of probability in physics. He is probability. He is, the laws of probability. He is math. He is logic. That's what the Logos is, logic, math. I mean, so it's really hard to have an actual conflict unless it's over a moral matter.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt again because Savage Atheist just gave us another super chat. Thanks again, Savage. So he says, so light and plants came before the sun? Question mark.
So light and plants came before the sun. Now, come on, dude. You're reading the book of Genesis in you're reading it like that retard Ken Ham. Please stop reading it. Like fucking Ken Ham. Ken Ham's a moron.
Here.
He's a moron.
Well, you won't find any disagreements with me there.
Yeah. That's twice I've agreed with you, Max.
Huh?
That's twice I've agreed with you now.
He is a moron. He's a moron. I'm sorry. I'm saying it out loud. I've had too much wine, but still, he's a moron. The book of Genesis is really deep, man, and it's got a lot going on that's interesting in it. But reading it like a kid's storybook, which is what Ken Ham does, is just stupid. I mean, what can I say? Ken Ham, and I'll give you a whole exposition on how to read Genesis if you like, how I look at it. But
that would be awesome. But I feel like we've grilled you enough. right now, so have another cup of wine, and we'll move on to the next one. So Louis de la Pena says, why many religious folk, I think it's supposed to be why do many religious folks tend to lie, saying, I was an atheist for a while and then I got on my knees and found Jesus? I have discovered that this is almost an obvious lie.
Why is it a lie? I mean, that didn't happen to me.
Yeah, speaking for myself, I'm not sure that's always a lie, or even, I don't know.
I don't think Max is lying.
I don't think Max is.
That's not how it happened to me. Actually, it was the Virgin Mary that got me, if you want to know the truth. But not because I had my encounter with her. But I talk to religious people all the time. And okay, when you say somebody's lying, why do you think they're lying? Why is their personal experience, why do you think their personal deep spiritual experience is just psychological? How do you know that? Why would you assume that? I did talk to a guy who said Jesus came to me personally. That didn't happen to me, but I'm like, why would I call him a liar? Why would I call him a lunatic or a crackpot? This is an experience that he had. I mean, to even compare it, if somebody told me that they had an alien encounter and that they were kidnapped by aliens, I would certainly be skeptical, but I wouldn't just say you're a liar or you're deluded. You know, you take that seriously and say, well, what happened? And what did you go through? And all that. That's how I see it anyway.
And speaking as an atheist who used to be a Christian, my least favorite thing in the world is having to have an argument defending that I was once a Christian. So I would that's a ridiculous thing to throw the other way as well. I mean, if you can't take someone at their word about what they do or didn't believe, then you're not even having a conversation anyway.
Oh, I totally agree. And by the way, I had people doing that shit to me, and it bothered me. Well, like they never look at you and say, well, well, I know how this goes, right? They come to you with a Bible and start trying to persuade you again, and saying there must be something wrong with you, and like they've got a dumb explanation and they're not making any sense, right? And that happens so many times.
Right, or they'll pull Bible verses out. Is it impossible for those who have once been enlightened to fall away, kind of thing, right? And it's like, well, then you know, it's impossible you were a Christian because this verse says you weren't. You know, so yeah.
Go ahead.
All I would say is I would never do the same. I bite my tongue rather than try and say the same thing to a former atheist. You know, it's a ridiculous thing.
You have to be kind of really not very bright. Let's say you're raised as a Christian or whatever. You really, truly have to be. G.K. Chesterton even said this. You have to be really not very bright and not very curious if you never look at your religion and go, is any of this shit true? I mean, you should be able to do that. You'd have to be very bright not to ask yourself that question. That, you know what I mean? I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just objecting to the question, I guess.
I think that there's varying levels of atheism as well as varying levels of theism, where, you know, you look at right now, one of the biggest countries in the world with the most atheists is China, but they're not atheists because, or many of them aren't atheists because they arrived at that through critical thinking, but because of, you know, political pressure or you know, there is a certain level of religious persecution there. And so oftentimes you have people who, you know, they may not be scientifically literate, they may not be critical thinkers, and then when they're exposed to a new position, they might be much more open to accepting it without actually really looking at the evidence. Whereas, you know, you take someone who, and I'm not just singling out China, I mean, you have people like that all over the world, but you also have theists who are in a similar boat, who they may have, you know, you're saying it's stupid to never question it, but I mean, I know that my upbringing until, you know, sometime in my early 20s, it was very, very much, you know, ingrained in me that you're not supposed to question it. It was, you know, you're supposed to have faith and not doubt. And curiosity was kind of seen as a bad thing if it ever questioned the fundamentals of the faith.
All right, so I'm gonna riff on that if you don't mind. I agree, and that level, that type of Christianity has always bothered me. It has always struck me as like the hijack. It's the believe or burn, intellectual hijack. If you ever intellectually accepted this proposition, you're saved. And then if you reject this intellectual proposition, you're damned and are going to be tortured for it. I just ran like that from the plague. What the fuck? I'm not going to believe something because you threatened me. You know, so, I mean, I fancy I know where you're coming from on that. There's two doctrines that came out of Protestantism that I reject, and not all Christians do. Okay, so, but I reject the doctrines of sola fide and sola scriptura. The doctrine of sola scriptura is that everything's in the Bible, and if you just read the Bible right, you'll get all the right answers. And we don't think that. And the sola fide, which is that you're saved by believing in, you know, sola fide, solely by fidelity, solely by, basically, which is the belief that if you accept this intellectual proposition, you're saved. And if you doubt this intellectual proposition, you're not saved. And then they'll go into the Bible and they'll say, see, it says this and that same verse you just quoted or whatever. And so you must have never believed in the first place, and therefore you must have never been saved in the first place. And I find that whole thing this twisty rabbit warren of, okay, so if I believe something, I'm good, and if I don't believe something, I'm not good. And like, what? It's incoherent. I don't see how anybody believes it. And yeah, they'll do that to you. They'll do that to you. They'll say that if you question this, there's something wrong with you. And no, you should be able to question things.
Max, so Ruben Bosch sent a super chat. Thanks, Ruben. So he asks, he has a question for you. He says, Max, how do you know how you're, quote, supposed to read Genesis? If a human decides the right interpretation of the scripture, whence comes its authority?
What we believe, and this is a definite departure from evangelical Christianity. It's a departure from your Pat Robertsons and your Ralph Reeds, and I don't know. Ask the question again.
I really like the word "whence" in there. By the way, that was awesome.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
I used it properly too.
Basically, if a human decides what's the right interpretation of the scripture, where does its authority come from?
Gotcha. Okay, where does its authority come from? What your more fundamentalist types like to do is say, we got this book, and God made us this book, and it just sort of magically appeared for us, and we just need to read this book, and that's where all your answers are. And they have some verses they quote to back that up. They're wrong, but whatever. What the more Orthodox Christians believe is that the book was written by people who were already believers, who had already had these experiences, and the book was validating what they already thought and what they already believed. And so we have these saints, these church doctors like Origen and Augustine and Aquinas and all those, who looked at them and said, all right, well, these scriptures may be infallible, but how do we interpret these infallible scriptures? These scriptures may be correct about everything, but how we interpret them is everything. And it's in the interpretation that it really matters. Was that a direct enough answer? Or?
I don't know that it necessarily would be from his perspective, because you're still suggesting that it was interpreted by humans. And if it was interpreted by humans, then it's invariably subject to a degree of fallibility, even if those humans were considered to be saints or somebody who, from your perspective, was communicated to by a deity. Them themselves being humans are fallible. Thus, the interpretation is almost certain to be fallible as well, and then you're basing something on a fallible interpretation. I think that's the question, if I'm interpreting it correctly.
No, I think that's fair. Okay, so let's put it to you this way. We start from the presumption that the scriptures are infallible, but our understanding of them is not. And that's where the challenge of the religion comes from. Are we reading this right? Are we applying this right? Do we really understand it right? And
so you're in a constant struggle to ensure that you are striving towards achieving the best interpretation of the scripture?
Yeah, actually. Yeah. I mean, we have something we think are settled matters, right? Like, should we call priest father? Yeah, we actually worked that out a long time ago. But I mean,
that was probably God's first priority, right?
It probably was.
What's the most important thing? What do I want to make sure they can't mess up?
No. That's actually a good way of looking at it. That's actually a really good way of looking at it, Shannon. What do I want to make sure they are least likely to misunderstand? Because it is understood that people are going to misunderstand it.
Right. So do you feel that, okay, this parlays into another question from me. So since you feel that there are certain things that are settled matters, do you feel like the things that are most important and most relevant to how we exist and how we exist day to day are the matters that are settled? Or do you think that they're more tertiary matters and matters that aren't as important when we face our day-to-day struggles and day-to-day decisions?
I think that the big questions are settled. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't kill without enough justification. Do what's right even when nobody's looking. Do what's right anyway. All of that is there. And then when we get into more complicated and esoteric questions, like how do we respond to two lesbians who want to get married? By the way, my sister-in-law had a legal wedding ceremony with her lesbian lover this evening. You know, how do we respond to that? That becomes, you know, a harder thing. And what the religion gives us, what the philosophy behind the religion gives us, is like this base from which we start. We know these things are true. Now we're presented with this situation. How do we apply it in this situation? Did that make sense?
I just want to interrupt really quick. I just wanted to thank Mark Alquist for his super chat.
I'm actually thanking all of you for just coming and asking these questions. I'm grateful.
We're always
I feel like
dialogue.
I feel like we're ganging up on you though. Like I feel like we all the questions have been just for you. But
the questions
let's
never come and talk to us.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
But before we're done, can I pose at some point? Can I pose a question for the whole audience to ponder? But
sure.
Before we're done. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. You had a follow-up, Thomas?
Yeah. You were saying that, you know, that you're able to use the Bible to kind of glean wisdom, and, you know, but it can be complicated. There can be multiple ways of interpreting something. What I've never understood is, if, let's say that, and I've used this analogy before, if a newspaper editor knows that the general audience he's writing to reads at a 9th grade level, and he's able to write his newspaper crystal clear accordingly, why can't the God of the universe do the same with his holy book and leave out passages that seem to imply that God hates fags and replace it with ones that say slavery is bad?
Oh, Wait a minute. I apologize. Too much fun. Ask me that again.
So if let's say that a newspaper editor is able to tailor their newspaper to their audience, and if God is all-knowing and he realizes that, hey, these are a bunch of dumb apes who, you know, they're not going to be able to figure this out, and only like 1% of them will have PhDs in theology, you'd think that God would also be able to tailor his work to his audience in such a way that we would be able to understand exactly what it's saying.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think I get it. Okay, all right. In other words, why aren't the scriptures more clear and transparent and easily understood? I think that's ultimately your question.
Yeah.
Right. Why aren't they? And the only thing I can say is, and by the way, you'll have fundamentalists and evangelicals coming in and say, "Well, you're talking about it's all clear." Whatever. I know it's not clear. I read the damn thing. Well, I shouldn't say damn, but I read it. It's not that clear. What we generally think is that we have people whose job it is to, you know, like lawyers or doctors or whatever, to interpret the data and let us know. That's kind of what the bishops are for, to a lesser extent the priests. I don't know. The life is, you know, life is complicated. Let's just say we look at something like the Constitution. Okay, I mean, I'm shifting a little bit. Let's talk about the Constitution. Let's say we all love the U.S. Constitution, and we think it's great, and we think it's perfect, and we think it's the best way of governing everything. And, you know, the Constitution is going to give us all our answers into how we do things. You must know by now that you can read that Constitution and then plunge yourself into a huge argument over how to interpret that part of the Constitution. Right? And what does this mean? And where are we going to come? How are we supposed to apply this and all that? And I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm just going to say life is complicated. We do think that ultimately, you know, you look in there, you're going to find your answers, but life still is hard, and you're always trying to find what the right answer is and what the right thing to do is and what the right way to interpret thing is. I mean, it's the human condition.
I think where I respect the Constitution more is that the Constitution doesn't claim to be perfect and infallible, and it even has caveats for amending it as society changes and grows and develops.
Oh, that's true. And I guess the way the Christian looking at it is an almost inversion of that. When you look at the scriptures, and again, I'm going to say Orthodox Christians believe in more than just the written words of the scriptures, but when you look at it, it's more like the base. It's like the template. It's like the what what is that thing they found in Egypt? The touchstone, the thing where like we start from here for the principles or ideas that we know to be true, and then we extrapolate from there. Well, how does this apply in this particular situation? And so it's always kind of a moving target. Just like psychology, by the way, which is always a moving target.
Oh, hey, Max.
It is.
Wait, I'll stop.
At best.
I'll stop.
I feel like we're.
I'll let.
I
John
feel like
no,
we're.
really. No, really.
I was gonna say.
I'm wondering. Like, let's say you go into psychology and you look at something like depression, which is something I struggled with for decades. Well, what is depression? Define depression. What does it mean? What does not depressed mean? What does curing depression mean? What does overcoming depression mean? How do you define any of these things? We know psychologically something called depression exists, but then going from there, it's like, well, how do we respond to it? What is it? How do we fix it? How does it get better or whatever? You see what I mean?
I feel like Savage Atheist is going to go broke, but he just sent another super chat. So.
Good job stopping me because I was just about to.
Yeah, he says either it's from an infallible, all-knowing God and therefore not open to interpretation, or man, so what's the point? It's just a damn book.
Well, yeah, look, you're not going to get much disagreement with me in the sense that really, I don't think the book alone will get you anywhere. I really don't. Ken Ham thinks the book will give you everything, and you just read it a certain way, and if you're in the Holy Spirit, you'll get the right answer. I don't believe any of that shit. So to me, it's like a completely different paradigm. You don't just think that the magic book will give you your magic answers as long as you're good with Jesus. There's people who think that. We don't. So
okay, I want to let's get to the next question, which was, what is the most convincing argument for there being a God that you have seen by first name, last name? That's a pretty cool name.
Okay, let me merely point out to you that the word convincing is kind of a weasel word, and I'm not accusing you. I'm just saying it's kind of a weasel word because convincing to whom, sir? I just used whom.
I think he means to each person answering the question.
Yeah.
No, because I find the fact that we have an orderly, intelligible, logical, predictable universe, which is intelligible and understandable and predictable all by itself to be proof that there has to be something intelligent running in the first place. Okay. I find that convincing. Do you? I don't know.
No,
I don't.
Okay. I don't think intelligibility. I don't think intelligibility arises on its own.
Well,
I just don't.
I think that was the basis of the question. I think he was wanting to know what each person of us, thought was convincing to us.
Yes, that's exactly what he's asking.
So we'll let Thomas go. Thomas.
I'm sorry. I guess I didn't get it. I didn't get it. What?
Well, no, that you answered the question for you, Max. Like you said, basically the way the universe runs and stuff like that. That's the most convincing thing to you, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So, or Thomas, sorry.
Holy Thomas.
Holy Thomas.
For me, I'd have to go with probably the fine-tuning argument. But even that, I mean, I did a video on it, and I'm like, if you're talking about the Earth being fine-tuned for life, there's a million different explanations as to why, it's not like you just look at the sheer quantity of planets, you look at the sheer quantity of different variations of planets throughout the galaxy, as well as the fact that our planet isn't fine-tuned for life. We have a source of energy that gives us cancer. We have struggled and fought hand, tooth, and nail trying to survive, and we've fine-tuned ourselves to this planet, not the other way around. Now, if you look at the universe as a whole and the constants, the fundamental constants of the universe, the gravitational constant, the cosmological constant, you'll oftentimes hear these figures that are pulled out of thin air that'll say, oh, it's just 1 in 100 trillion whatever, or 1 times 2 to the billion power or something, and it's these astronomically massive numbers. But I've always been curious where they actually get those estimates from, because when I talk to physicists, when I talk to people like Lawrence Krauss, or when I listen to like Sean Carroll, they usually will disagree on the numbers that they're coming at it with, and almost always there's some type of caveat for, oh well, you know, a subsequent paper came out that actually proved this wrong or that wrong. And we don't know that there's not an infinite number of universes. So I know that's long-winded, but it's both the most convincing, and yet I'm still reasonably unconvinced.
Well, I mean, I admit I'm somewhat cutting a Gordian knot here, but but it is one of the things. Even when I was an atheist, this bothered me. This hyper focus on the original point of origin, and did some divine tinker come in and make life happen or whatever. I always found that a distraction. To me, it is very obvious that the laws of probability themselves, or whatever, the laws of probability are there's an intelligence underlying the laws of probability. So when you tell me, for example, you know, when you say, for example, are you saying the universe was fine-tuned for life on Earth? It's almost like you've missed the point. If something is running the laws of probability, then that something can arrange things however it likes, including setting up the conditions for there to be life and sentience and all that. It's like, to me, when I listen to this, it's like, look at a game like Minecraft, and look how you're running through the game of Minecraft, and you're building blocks and with wood or whatever, and you're killing goats and whatever, and then you ask yourself the question, I'm living in Minecraft and I'm doing all these things. Did anything, not only did anything design Minecraft, but is anything making Minecraft go right now? And then when I hear your question, I hear like, was Minecraft developed for goats? Was it designed to make there be goats? And it's like, no, it was designed to be everything we're seeing right now. So do whatever it is you want with that, but Minecraft wasn't designed for goats.
I'm not quite following the analogy, but in kind of response to your statistics comment a second ago, you know, you could say, you know, oh, hey, if you have God designing it, suddenly, you know, it's not improbable at all. But I would posit that if you have a universe that the probability of all this coming out of, you know, nothing, let's say that it's 1 × 10 to the you know, 1 billion, right? Now, if suddenly you take that exact same universe and you say, now there's an infinitely more complex, powerful, all-knowing, amazing God, well, I can look at that God and be like, well, the probability of that God existing and then creating this universe is 1 × 10 to the trillion. You know, it makes it more improbable. It's even more improbable that you have, you know, a deity that's even more complex. And where did it come from? How did it get there? How did it, you know, if there is a God, if there is some type of deity that came about that created all this, that reversed entropy and started a new universe and designed it all, I find it most plausible that that kind of a God would have started off like us, of humble origins, of tiny parts, that we can replicate each one of these stages, and we can study each one of these stages of simplicity, you know, or complexity arising out of simplicity, and abiogenesis and evolution, and we can observe this happening. And then that creation, or that entity becoming infinitely wise and having some type of universe-wide supercomputer that's able to, you know, accomplish some massive, amazing thing. But it still had to have come from somewhere. And I'm like, why can't we be the first step in that process? Why aren't we the first ones that are attempting that?
What's interesting I'm sorry, what?
I was just going to say the Savage Atheist did another super chat.
Let me ask him first before I go.
Welcome.
Saw that Christmas
money. It's not a question. He
just
says, welcome to infinite regress. Laugh out loud.
Welcome to infinite regress. And right. Oh, there's contemplating infinity will start messing your head up if you do it much. But let me just say, what you just said there what was like, really sounds like the Mormon view of God, and I'm not even kidding. Now, to be honest, I don't consider Mormons Christians, but they think very close to what you just said. In fact, they think Jesus was a guy who was really smart, who figured a bunch of shit out and became a god, and more or less created this universe in the process of doing that. That's what Mormons think.
Well, but I'm not making any spiritual claims. I'm not saying that we transcend the natural world. I'm saying, society as a whole, if we become so technologically advanced that we can create other universes. And that's the major distinction I want to make.
That I don't know, that might happen. What we think is that an intelligence is driving those laws of physics and probability in the first place. And we think there must be an ultimate, source for all that. Not the guy who came in as a tinker and made it all go, but like, why does math work in the first place? Why does logic work in the first place? Why is the universe intelligible to us at all? And so, I mean, what we tend to think this is an ultimate source, which is ultimately simple, by the way. You just talked about all this complexity and how God would have to be complex, which is sort of like Richard Dawkins's 747 argument, 747 argument. But what like Aquinas and others said was the other way around. God is ultimately simple. God is the ultimate infinite simplicity from which all complexity arrives. Now, what am I trying to say on that? God's the mind that's running everything ultimately, and it's been, God's been there all the time.
It doesn't sound simple to me.
Well, ultimate simplicity. You're saying complexity arises out of very simple conditions, aren't you?
Well, that's what I'm claiming. That's not what I hear most creationists arguing.
He's not a creationist, though.
I'm not a creationist.
That's not what I hear most theists arguing.
Well, I don't know. There's a neat movie out there to go and watch. It's called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And it's a neat movie because it's basically two guys arguing over the existence of God. And they're actually two characters out of Shakespeare's Hamlet, but they're minor characters. And what they're doing is they're arguing while they're off scene as to whether there's a God or not. And they go into these basic questions like flip a coin, and does it come up heads or tails? Okay, and regardless of why it comes up whether it comes up heads or tails, why did it go that way? And you say it's 50-50. Okay, when you flip the coin. Okay, why? Why is it 50-50? What's making it be 50-50? And, the argument over God is like the argument of, well, why is it 50-50? Because God's ultimately in charge of the laws of probability, because God's an intelligence that's running that. Like the physics engine in Fallout 4 or the physics engine in Minecraft or whatever. God's determining those probabilities because God is the laws of probability. Do you know what I mean?
I kind of get it.
The moral is to not ask all of us a question because it'll take 3 to 6 hours for all of us to get the opportunity.
Let's get to that.
And hi, GM Skeptic. You've been here for 20 minutes. How you doing?
Hey guys.
Hey. Oh my god, I didn't even notice that you were there. Sorry.
Yeah, it's been here for 100 years.
I've been trying to do like 3 things at once, so I'm so bad.
Oh no, you're good.
I just wanted to say I wanted to say thanks to Nayabu who just gave us a super chat. He did. All right, said he just wanted to say hi.
Can I give you all the secret code to understanding Catholics at least?
Oh god.
Well, how about wait, no. How about we get
Matt.
I want to hear what the others have to say about their most convincing argument, but we can talk about that after. But there's a couple people in there in the chat. Yeah, I just want to say that because there's a bunch of people in the chat that ask questions and they want us to get to their questions, and we won't if we go at this pace. So, so how about you, Paul? What's your most convincing? What's the argument that's most convincing to you?
Very briefly, it would have to be personal experience. I obviously, you know, if I'm talking to someone and they say that their whole reason for believing in, you know, whatever they believe in is entirely based on the personal experience they've had with God, I can't argue with that. Obviously, it's not evidence for me, but there's nothing I can say to argue with that. I also feel like that if I was to ever return to a belief in God, I don't know what the evidence would take, but I know God, if he existed, knows what that evidence would be, and I suspect it would probably be something involving, you know, some kind of personal connection with that proposed deity. So I suspect that's the one that probably I would have to say is most convincing.
What about you, GM?
I mean, I feel like actually I came on the stream to ask the exact question that Thomas asked, and as soon as I got on, he asked it. So kudos to him. But my answer would basically be the same as Thomas's too. Actually, I would say that overall, I mean, if I have anything to add to that, it would be that it's counterintuitive, or at least it goes against, I think, our basic instinct and our basic instinct toward just a natural cognition to be able to understand that basically something that is complex may arise from something that does not have any kind of sentience. Because anything that's a complex system, essentially, we see as something we've created. You know, I think in the early days when we didn't really have much technology, anything that was more complicated than, you know, I'm struggling for words here, but basically we created tools, and we created, you know, irrigation systems. We created agriculture. All these complex systems that we saw were coming from us. They were coming from a creative mind. And so I don't think that for very long we've actually recognized the world as being a particularly being a complex system. It's either an assortment of objects, or it's seen as a complex system. And when it is seen as that way, maybe I'm not even making sense here. When it is seen as that way, then it's seen as something that has to come out of cognition, has to come out of intent. And I think it's kind of counterintuitive, actually, to think, not that it's unreasonable, but I don't think that it's particularly normal. It's not something that we naturally come to, that the universe as a complex set of systems, you know, to think that could have arisen without something or someone intending for that to come about. I mean, you know, we're asked all the time, if you don't think God created the world, who created the world? And there's a presupposition. I think that's inborn. I think that we're nearly born thinking, after we have observed enough of reality, after we get to a certain age, I think that we naturally think, this is complex. Who created it? Who made this complex? That's what we automatically do. I mean, maybe you guys wouldn't agree with that, but that's probably what I would say is most convincing, because I think that you have to overcome natural cognitive biases to be able to actually understand that that's not reasonable. Does that make sense?
So just our innate sense of our innate bias toward agency.
Yeah. Well, okay. That's a pretty much perfect way of saying it. While I rambled on for a little while, but yeah, thank you, Paul.
He reins me in too. Don't worry.
What do you think, Shannon? What's yours?
I think it would almost. I'm more similar to Paul. It would almost invariably have to be something that was personal. I don't think that there is anything that would compel me, I should say, that didn't have some sort of personal relevance. So it would have to be something that happened specifically to me that compelled me. I don't believe that looking at, I haven't been exposed to any body of work that contradicts my existing belief. So I don't believe that I ever will be. So the only thing that I can think of as feasible is some sort of personal miraculous experience. That's what it would have to be.
I've always found the moral argument the most, like the hardest to refute, like how there's got to be something that anchors or is an ought. What makes an is an ought is basically the argument, which is the one that I find the most compelling.
So do you subscribe to a subjective or an objective view of morality?
Subjective.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, subjective and there's objective. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I guess if you,
Yeah.
which is why I find it interesting to think about. But I mean, if it's, you know, if we think of something that is objectively bad, like let's say, you know, we all agree that raping is bad, then
Right.
you can objectively show by numbers what, you know, how much good and how much bad is happening. But you'd have to agree on it, so that would be a subjective.
Right. It's
Morality,
the hardest
right.
argument to wrap around. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that so many people agree on what is bad, like the big ones on what is bad, that it seems like it goes without saying. And because it seems like it goes without saying, because there's that broad consensus, we all think, well, of course, that's objective, but it still is subjective. It's just that we've all come to a broad consensus. So
Yeah.
the juxtaposition makes it difficult.
Can I point some stuff out here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, like one of my favorite, I don't know that he's an atheist, but he thinks like one. Is Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, H-I-I-D-T.
He is an atheist.
Yeah, he is.
He more or less is, and I still really like him, and I really like listening to him. And I'm just going to pose a general question. I'm not going to give the answer, but I know it's a general question that he posed, and I really liked it when he posed it, and he's talked about this. And he says, he studies moral psychology, right? And he looks at it from an evolutionary point of view. And by the way, for the record, I really like Jonathan Haidt. I enjoy listening to him. I get a lot out of him.
I really like Jonathan Haidt as well. I've read his book, The Righteous Mind. It's a great read, great read. I just wanted to break in because the Savage Atheist did another super chat. Says moral argument is yours. You're killing me, Smalls. Laugh out loud. And Happy Hoplite also did super chat and says, ask Dean what God is made of. What substance
please do not call me Dean. My name is Max. Okay,
right.
But and that's for him, not you.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that is my Christian name, and I mean it. But whatever. Go ahead.
Fair enough. Okay, so ask Max what God is made of, what substance makes up his brain, where do his thoughts occur?
Can I table that conversation to go back to the Jonathan Haidt? How do you say it? Haidt?
Tight.
Haidt. Okay. Yeah. I loved this moral question that he posed because he did a scientific study on it, published and all that. And he asked people, there's YouTube videos on this somewhere. And he says, all right, I'm going to somewhat, put it in my own words, right? So if I've got it wrong, you can go back to him and find it, but whatever. But he poses an interesting moral question to people and, did a study of their responses. I'll make a little of this up, but all right, John and Sally are brother and sister. And they are both approximately 25 years old, approximately. Okay, I'm not saying they're twins or whatever, but they're within a year or two. They're brother and sister, and they're 25 years old, and they decide that they want to experiment with having sex with each other, and they have sex with each other, and protection is used. There's no diseases. There's no unwanted pregnancy. There's nothing that happened. And they go ahead and do that. John and Sally do that, and they get the grind on. And then they come back. They come back, and they say, well, we're probably not going to do that again, but we really enjoyed it, and we grew closer as brother and sister from the experience. What do you think of that? And people kind of lost their minds because they all said that's wrong.
Yeah. Well,
but nobody could come up with, even atheists were like, well, because of the Bible.
It's funny because when I was reading the book, I asked my fiance that question because I came to that question. So basically, what happened was
It's been a fun day.
yeah, but she surprised me. So, anyways, as she usually does. But it was so basically what the question is that the moral question of whether a sister and a brother can have sex, and most people when you ask them, they say no, and then they'll give you reasons. So the reasons are usually it causes disease or malformation of the fetus or whatever, those kinds of things. But then if you take out all of those extraneous factors, right? So you say, well, it's not possible for them to have kids. They're using protection, and so forth and so forth. Now, do you still think it's wrong? And most people will still say no because it's a gut reaction of no. But they don't have a reason. They can't rationally. And they usually go back to saying the same things. And then the person that's doing the interview has to remind them, well, no, they can't get pregnant, and so forth. So when I asked my fiance, she said, well, no, to the first question of, is it okay? But then when you throw out all of those extraneous things, she said, well, then, yeah, it would be fine. Like, I mean, I wouldn't do it, but it's not morally wrong. So, so yeah, it's a pretty interesting. It's an interesting book. I really liked it too.
Yeah, I'd have to weigh in on that and say, oh, sorry, Shannon.
I was just gonna say, do you think that's a visceral reaction from like social priming? Like,
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I mean, I think that it's very hard for us to distinguish between what we find repulsive, maybe for some kind of instinctual like health reason, or just what we find gross. Yeah. Distinguishing that from something that we think is wrong. I mean, there's this channel, Islamic channel called Dawa Man, and Bible Reloaded reacted to it, and it was a hilarious video. But this guy said, "Is it wrong to drink your dad's sperm?" And basically, he makes this whole story where his dad leaves this big vat of sperm in the fridge for him, like with a little note that's like "from daddy" or something. And it's repulsive. I mean, it's super gross. It's so nasty. But,
how's that wine, Max? How's that wine?
I need more.
That's what happens when you hang out with atheists, Max.
But you're not genetically modified. You're not the grossest guy ever. No,
I started it, Max.
Was it genetically modified semen?
I almost spit out my drink. God damn it.
A piece of string and Jake Pizzomo also gave super chat, so thank you. I'm gonna try to get to your questions. So just wanted to get back to that question that was originally asked by Happy Hoplite to Dean, which was what substance makes up God's brain and where do his thoughts occur?
Max.
To Max.
Max, I'm sorry. I'm just reading the thing and it says Dean. I'm sorry.
I curse you forever. No.
I wasn't doing it to be a jerk, honest.
Okay, you're okay. We're shifting back and popping back a few levels.
Yeah.
It's the idea, and by the way, the pantheists out there will like this idea. I'm not a pantheist, but they will like this idea that intelligence is running it all in the first place. Something non-material is running it all in the first place. So, and then it has to be like a mind. Can you repeat the question for me?
So, yeah, he says, you say, oh, wait, my bad. I'm reading the wrong one. Okay, so it says, ask Max what God is made of, what substance makes up its brain, where do his thoughts occur? So basically he's saying where do his thoughts, what generates his thoughts?
Okay, all right. Yeah, right. Let's just go ahead and be sexist and say he. All right, so let's just do that. Let's say he.
Is that his gender or his sex?
Oh, God, don't.
He chose it. He chose it.
Giving its wrong pronoun.
Plus, women are stupid in the first place.
Hey!
Oh.
No,
Max, I've been very calm.
Did your mom teach you that?
I'm teasing you. No, I mean, this ultimately gets to a really old question, by the way. Does essence proceed? Oh, whatever. the idea of eternity. Let me just expound on the idea of eternity. Eternity is not the idea of forever, you know, like infinite time. Eternity is the idea of outside of time, beyond time, you know, controlling time, even to a certain extent. And so, read the question to me again.
Basically, where did I'll have to find it.
Where did this divine intelligence come from in the first place?
It's more like what's its brain, like what generates the thoughts that it's thinking, right? Because most of the time, you know, for humans, it's our brain, right? So it's a material object. So without the material, where would God produce these thoughts?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. Well, where would God produce these thoughts? Excuse me, I don't know if you can hear that. Where would God? What we think is that outside of time and space, beyond time and space, above and beyond time and space, there has to be something eternal, a thought, an idea, a principle, something that is ultimately responsible for all of this. So eternity is beyond time. I don't know if I'm answering you, but like if you okay, I'll go ahead and pull out a Bible verse. And by the way, let me note, for example, that I rarely actually pull out Bible verses. I really do, rarely do that. But in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's John 1:1. God is the ultimate primeval idea, the Word, the Logos, thing that's driving it all, that is beyond time, beyond space, that is ultimately responsible for all of us. So that's kind of what the Logos is. So it has to have been eternal. The Logos has to have been eternal. Well, it has to be beyond time. It has to be running everything.
This question from a piece of string kind of dovetails into that last one. It says, you say God is ultimately simple, but also a mind. Isn't there an implicit burden of complexity to being a mind and having intent? And then he says, whence?
and uses it properly. So
how about that one?
I don't know.
Properly. Yeah, well, I mean, and that is ultimately a philosophical position. Did it all arise out of random chaos and we just kind of lucked into intelligence and sentience or whatever? Or is there like an ultimate eternal intelligence underlying everything? And I go with there's an ultimate intelligence underlying everything.
But I think what the question is that if God is simple, which I've heard before from classical theists like Gσ̳ɳα and classical theists, and it has a mind, wouldn't a mind suggest that it has complexity? So it can't really be simple. I think that's what the questioner is trying to ask.
Oh, well, that's fair. Well, I guess let me just turn it around on you. You take as an item of faith that intelligence just sort of incrementally arose. And then when I look at it and I go, no, there was ultimately an intelligence already that's creating all this intelligible order we're seeing.
But he's not really arguing whether or not it's a true proposition. He's just saying if it's simple, then how could you have a complex mind?
All right. Well, all right. That's, you know what? I think it's a fair objection. And in fact, the doctrine of divine simplicity has been challenged by some, including some Orthodox Christians who don't like the Catholic position on this. But the Catholic position is that God is ultimate simplicity and that all complexity arises from that ultimate simplicity. So
maybe you can make a video about it, because I find that interesting. I find that question interesting as one I've asked other people as well. I just wanted to get onto Jake Pizzarmo. I was going to ask Jake Pizzarmo asks, how about a working definition of the term kind? Are bats birds? Are whales fish? Asking Max.
I don't feel like I'm gonna use that stuff.
I feel like I'm gonna have to have you on again, Max.
Anytime you want, man. Anytime you want.
Jake also pledged $2 and wrote, "Please disregard." So is he paying to ask the question and then paying to then say, "Don't read it"? I have no idea.
Or maybe he realized that Max isn't a YEC. He's not a young Earth creationist.
Yeah, we all told him that in the chat.
I'll watch the live chat, and if he responds with, if he wants us to proceed, then I'll.
Okay, then let's move on to the next question. But thank you for the super chat. Okay, so I'm just gonna grab the next question here. So this one's from That's Ridiculous. So I've got an interesting one for you. I was wondering how and what is the best way to tell someone you are in a relationship with an atheist, like that they're an atheist. Also, if they already know when would it be best to have a discussion about differing religious views, if at all? Love the videos. Hope your life is going well. Yeah.
Paul's a good one.
Wait, what? The question is that a theist is in a relationship with an atheist, or to tell their
I think he's an atheist, or he or she is an atheist, and they want to tell their significant other, but they're not sure if they should or when's the best time they should do it.
Well, in my case, there was no good time. In my case, it ended my marriage very quickly. But at the same time, you got to be in. I guess it would be at the point to which the intellectual honesty of the situation is outweighing the relationship itself, and or the nature of the relationship. I would think that if you're in the partner type relationship with someone, that the worldview kind of needs to be resolved up front, and definitely do it before you get married, and definitely do it before you were to have a kid. Obviously, if you were to have an unequally yoked parenting situation, that is brutal. My spouse is my ex-spouse, the mother of my kids, is a devout Christian, and I'm obviously an atheist, so that creates a lot of conflict. So before it gets too far, I guess is the answer. I don't know, and be prepared for it to be a game changer or an ender. I don't know. That's a downer answer.
If I'm able to answer this, I went through this and came out the other side, and it all kind of worked out. Basically, what I did was didn't go whole hog, didn't just drop the bomb. It was more like leaving subtle hints, but then also just kind of discussing philosophy enough in somewhat vague terms, more like just kind of throwing out questions here and there, when she's like, "Oh, what are you thinking about today?" And I say this, I just give some kind of question that maybe a street epistemologist may ask. I think one of my very first ones was talking about how exactly can faith be a valid way of coming to a belief if it can be used to come to any conclusion. And I'm just thinking about that today. And that'd be about it. And that over a series of, months, basically. And eventually, when it's pretty clear that I'm no longer Christian, it's like, so what are you now? I'm like an atheist. She's like, oh yeah, I can see why. And that's it. Yeah, but that's kind of how it went. I mean, and there was a lot more, like there's some emotional issues there that I won't really go into, but I up to it rather than dropping the bomb all at once. And I think that it worked out better that way. And I think that she acknowledges that it works out better that way. However, I do acknowledge that does encourage some dishonesty. And so if that's something that your significant other would completely be upset about, wouldn't want to tolerate any bit of, just easing them there and thereby kind of lying by omission, then maybe don't take that approach. But that's what worked okay for me. And she's now listened to so many of those questions that she's also non-religious. So
interesting. So So we have a couple more super chats. So Ghostly Enigma, thanks for the super chat, says, question for everyone, have theists or atheists, how heaven and hell would work given the spans of time or lack of time without the mind getting used to it or being bored?
I didn't understand that.
I think it's basically saying like, if say you had hell, right? If you had a hell where you're being burned for eternity, you'd eventually get used to the pain, and it wouldn't be, or it would be, you'd either get bored or you'd just get used to it, so it wouldn't be much of a hell.
Right.
I think that's kind of what he's saying.
Sure. No, I actually think that's true, and one of my biggest beefs with certain kinds of Christians, is, one of which is the, believe this shit or burn, motherfucker, idea, which really bothers me for a bunch of reasons, including the which I would probably be in hell if it really worked that way. But and by the way, genetically modified, I've been really mean to you. We've been really mean to you, and but it is just shit posting. Okay, all right. So
I'm mean to genetically too. So I mean,
we all are. It's fine. I
put him drinking in my videos. And
yeah, you guys always pick on me because I'm the youngest.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Well, except for Alex.
But
yeah,
you've actually touched on an issue that is very personal to me, and a lot of issues. Like, okay, listen, literally, I'm not kidding you. When I married my ex-wife, and I am divorced, when I married my ex-wife, I told her, I don't believe any of this shit, and I don't believe any of it, but I think there's some kind of value to having a religious upbringing as how do you know right from wrong? How do you know whatever? I'm okay if we raise our kids religiously, even though I'm an atheist, and that's part of why we got married in the first place. And it is because I thought that, well, you've got to have some kind of moral basis to say anything, and you've got to raise the kids in some kind of something. Otherwise, the poor kid has just he has like chaos. He has no way that he or she.
It's all elf on the shelf.
I'm sorry?
It's all elf on the shelf. That's all you need.
Elf on the shelf. I don't know what that means.
That's fine.
Oh, you're lucky. I have a 6-year-old. I know all about what the hell that means.
Before there was elf on the shelf.
No, tell me what it means. I'm not arguing.
That's
okay.
The,
I can tell you what.
Oh, go ahead, Shan. Yeah,
go ahead.
Every night before I go to bed, for the month of December, right up until Christmas, I have to take a little tiny doll that looks like an elf, and I have to move it around my house at night because it's supposed to fly back to the North Pole and tell Santa whether or not my son has been good or bad, and then fly back in the morning to watch him again. And if he touches him, that elf will lose his magic and he can't fly back that night, and he ends up staying in the same spot, and that's a big disappointing mess that you don't want to have to deal with.
You should get him to touch it so you don't have to go through the whole work. I don't know.
Well, no, because then he's devastated because he thinks that he was bad and that Santa's not going to bring it. It's the worst decision I've ever made in my life, was getting that elf on the shelf.
It's a life lesson. Just shrug it off, man. Shrug it off.
Yeah, but then he's the only one who doesn't have an elf. He goes to school, and why don't I have an elf? Anyway, that's what an elf on the shelf is, Max. Sorry, I'm getting angry because I hate that.
Instead of going with elf on a shelf, you should have gone with Neil deGrasse Tyson on a bison.
Oh my God, if that was a thing that I could get, that Blake would have that. So he'd have all of those.
So
I want to change the subject. It is a total change of subject. But Shannon,
yeah.
Have you noticed yet that little boys are different from little girls?
I've never given birth to a little girl, so I don't have a basis of comparison aside from myself. Really, to go off of other people's kids, and I find all kids different. My kid is definitely different and unique in a myriad of ways. But I only have the one. He's an only child, so I don't have a basis of comparison to answer that question adequately for you, Max.
So,
didn't it change your world when you gave birth to him? Didn't it change everything you saw about everything?
Absolutely, 100%. That is an accurate statement.
So Happy Hoplate asks, I'm sorry, Max, but he says, ask MaxiPad why he couldn't answer my why he couldn't answer why he couldn't answer my fucking dumbass question or damn ass question. Is God made of matter, energy, farts, and sunshine?
What's God made out of? What's God made out of? Ultimately, the only answer I have is the intelligence that makes that all go. All right, the intelligence that makes it all go.
Would it be fair to put it in terms of Max is defining God as being outside of what is observable to human beings and what is useful as a descriptive term, therefore it can't actually be described by human beings in a way that makes sense regarding your question. So you're asking what matter God is made of, and Max is saying, well, God's not made of matter. And that's the only, like, maybe matter and energy is all I can actually use to describe the properties of something. Therefore, since I think it's beyond that, I can't answer that any further. Would that make sense, Max?
That's actually pretty good.
Okay, I thought that's what you were
doing. I'm gonna like let me think about that and actually ask you to ask it again. And by the way, if I have to think about it and come back later, that's fair. But ask me the question again because it seems like a real good question.
Ask my question again?
Yeah, please do. I mean, it seemed like a real good question.
Okay, well, I was just trying to ask and clarify your answer.
You're Steel Manning.
Because yeah, exactly. I'm Steel Manning. So you're saying that basically the original question was that, you know, someone was asking, what is God made of? What's his intelligence comprised of? Probably thinking, you know, all intelligence that we know of comes from, you know, our synapses, or it comes from, it's an artificial intelligence. We can actually see electrical impulses, and that's what intelligence is made of. So what is God's intelligence made of? What is his brain made out of? And you would say, I define God as God is definitionally beyond matter and energy. And because matter and energy are the only terms that we know to use to be able to describe an intelligence, I can't actually describe, or what intelligence could be made of. I can't actually describe what it's made out of, what God's made out of. All I can say is he's beyond that. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's all right. First off, I'm going to be a weasel a little bit, and I'm going to say I'm actually going to think about that question seriously, and for a little while. And so I'm not going to give you an answer right now because I have to think about it, and I've had half a bottle of wine.
Fair enough.
No, that's totally fair.
This totally seems like a fair question.
Yeah,
it really does.
It's a complex one.
I just had an epiphany.
What's that?
If God is able to create energy out of nothing, then is God made of flubber?
The root answer, and again, I'm not proposing that I've given you the like killer answer to your question, but the root answer is that there is an intelligence underlying everything, and that it is eternal. In other words, beyond time, even that it's like always been there. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The intelligence was there first, and it's eternal, so it's beyond time and space. But I really do need to think about that, so it's not hard. It's not fair for you to like.
That's fair enough.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
I gotta think about that. It's a good question.
So Mathoma asked, do you believe that chunks of matter can have thoughts? Also, can these chunks of matter have thoughts that are about other chunks of matter? If so, why isn't this just postulating magical powers to matter?
Mathoma asked that?
Mathoma asked that, yeah.
What does he mean by...
Mathoma's a real smart guy. Okay. Let me put it to you this way. This is what I think the atheist position is that intelligence arrives as a result of natural processes, and it just kind of does that. And we think something intelligent ultimately is running underneath it all. And I'm just gonna say I'm not ready to defend it because I've had a bunch of wine, and I'm but like something intelligent is underlying all of it. The laws of probability, the laws of physics. Something intelligent that is eternal, therefore outside of time and space, is ultimately running this. All of it. Like, but
I feel like Mathoma's kind of trying to get to, like, I think the chunks of matter is our brain. So he's saying, like, he's basically saying, you know, can chunks of brain, you know, can brains have thoughts, and if so, you know, can they think about other chunks of brains, and if so, why wouldn't they be called magical powers? I don't see any reason why we should believe that thoughts come from anywhere else besides the brain. I mean, I've never seen any of that, but
let me just expostulate on that. What you have to believe, more or less, as a materialist atheist, is that logic itself, mathematics itself, all of that arose through a long, slow period of evolution or whatever, and that logic itself is, and then the math itself and things like that, we just kind of impose that on the universe because that's how we see things. Whereas if you have a theist worldview, you believe that things like logic and intelligence and mathematics are beyond that they're eternal, they always work, and that they're beyond time and space.
But Max, I have a question for you that's particularly pertaining to that. So you said that if you're a theist, you believe that math is beyond, I'm just using math specifically so that we can be concise, that math is beyond time and space. And if you're a materialist atheist, then you believe that we evolved our way to math. No matter what way you look at that, though, we essentially discovered the concept or how to apply or how to understand mathematical principles through human development. So math isn't always something that humans were capable of understanding and communicating and teaching. It's something that we learned how to do over time, whether or not we had a theistic perspective or not. So are you suggesting that there's a differentiation between the way that an atheist views mathematical principles and the way a theist views mathematical principles, or the way they came about discovering mathematical principles, or the way they view them? So I just don't understand exactly what you're getting at, I suppose. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I am going to have to jet out of this soon because I gotta go and I'm tired. No, listen, think real hard about this. 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
Why?
I'm thinking that. Give me a minute.
Holy shit, my brain.
I got it. I thought super hard.
2 + 2 = 4. Why? Why does 2 + 2 = 4?
Definitionally.
Yeah, well, definitionally, yes. Why does 2 + 2 = 4? Why does the universe appear to open itself up to scrutiny and let us predict it? Why does 2 + 2 = 4? Why, when you flip a coin, does it come up heads or tails roughly 50% of the time? What is the guiding rule behind that makes it so? That's what the logos is, by the way. The logos is like, why does the universe respond to math? Why does the universe?
But that's just an understanding of quantity. 2 + 2 = 4 because we've assigned
it
1
isn't.
as an individual quantity. So 1 is a quantity. Two
No,
ones equals 2. 2 + 2 = 4, and then that's 4 of any one individual quantity. So we're quantifying an object.
Why?
Why are we quantifying an
Why?
object? So that we can have a better understanding of
Why does it respond to math at all?
It doesn't respond to math.
we use math to
Okay.
understand the world. The
Math
world
is
doesn't respond to math.
descriptional.
So did we impose that on the universe, or did we observe it?
Neither. It's an observation. Well, yeah, sorry. We observe that 2 + 2 = 4.
Why? And why every time? Do you think 2 + 2 = 4 every time? Why?
Because we gave
That's
we
the
assigned
nature of
quantity.
that's the nature of the universe. That's what all laws of science are. They're merely observations for which we have found no exceptions.
So it just does that?
Correct.
Well, because we defined
Okay.
4 as being 2 of 2 things.
Okay, so is mathematics something we impose on the universe from our brain, or does the mathematics are they eternal purposes that underlie the whole universe?
It's a tool we use.
I mean,
to understand the universe.
Math is just a language.
Literally, what the Christian thinks, if he's, of course, they don't all think this, right? That like Jesus came to me, whatever. You can make whatever you want of that. But the logos is, and it's an ancient concept. The logos is math, logic, ideas themselves. Is that something we impose on the universe, or were they already there? And if they were already there, well, I don't know. That's all I got, because I'm actually going to jet out of here sometime, guys. But why does logic work at all, and why do you believe logic works?
Is it insufficient to say? I mean, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case, but is it insufficient to say we don't necessarily know?
Well, yeah, but that's describing an agnostic position, not an atheist position, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't really like to get into, definitional arguments, because I think that words are utilitarian, really. They're just tools. But yeah, I would say it doesn't really matter what the position is. You can call me whatever you want based on this. But is it insufficient to say we don't know? And if so, then is it somehow better to assert that we do know in a certain case, when we don't necessarily have more evidence for one case, for one reality, than for another, because both of us don't know?
You know what? I'm going to leave it there. And I am going to disconnect now, and I'm not being a dick. But I am going to say that this is a really big question. Is something making logic go? Or does it just kind of do that? Is something making the laws of physics go? Or does it just kind of do that? And that question is like huge. And I'm going to make the classical theist argument here. Okay, it's the classical theist, and it is theist, right? It's not just, Christian or whatever. Is ultimately the fact that any of it works at all. Why does it do that? That's what I'd say. I think something intelligent is running the laws of physics. I think something intelligent is running the laws of probability. Why do I think that? Am I crazy to think that? I think there's something intelligent behind that. That's what I'd leave you with. And I'm actually going to go now because I'm a little drunk. Fair enough?
No problem.
I hope you're
Fair
not
enough.
driving anywhere, Max.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Max, because it's you're the lone religious person here, so
Brave.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
brave.
I have to say that's pretty admirable. So good on you, man.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining.
I really enjoyed it, guys. I really enjoyed it. Have a good conversation. Okay, I'm gonna drop out now, and I think what I think. You think what you think, and I don't actually hate anybody. Okay. All right.
Heart you, Max.
We'll have to have you on again too. All right. There goes Max. All right. So I don't know. We could end it here, or we could keep going. I have a bunch of questions. So
I feel like people probably have a lot of questions for the atheists in the group. So
yeah,
I feel like there's more. I'm down to stay.
I'm down to stay a bit.
Okay. You're good. Okay. GE was in the chat saying he wanted to join. You can join up if you want, GE. I can send you a link.
Nah, fuck GE.
That's why we're all mean to you, GM. God.
He's like the worst. Okay, so
hey, okay, so this is my go-to. This is my go-to joke now, but GE is the one that shoves nachos up his ass, so he's the one we
Oh gosh.
I don't even want to know.
No,
is it not odd that we have GE, GC, and GM all in one chat?
Yeah.
That is weird, yeah. Lots of G's in the atheist
Well,
circle.
you know what they say, longest name, longest, you know.
Okay, so from Mr. Chiller, we have, is there a cognitive difference between religious and philosophical belief systems and political ideologies, example, communism or capitalism, or are they all just orientations, structures created by limited human experience to give life meaning?
That's a very complex question.
I would say that the existence of dogma in a position is something that determines a useful classification between maybe a philosophical position and a religious position, but that comes down to the way that you actually want to define religion. So it's kind of still big bag of worms.
I'm interested in that. What was the question again? Could you repeat that question? Because that's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah. Is there a cognitive difference between religious and philosophical belief systems and political ideologies, for example, communism or capitalism, or are they all just orientation structures created by limited human experience to give life meaning?
Well, I think that they are all created by humans, like religion and political ideologies are clearly created through thinking but I don't know that there's a lot of differentiation. I was actually in a conversation with a YouTuber named Friended Forever yesterday, and he was speaking specifically about how religions have utility because it helps form people into cohesive groups, similar to the manner in which political ideologies and political systems help form people into cohesive groups, and thus they have some utility. So I think if you look at the argument from that perspective, then yeah, you could say that they have some fairly broad-reaching similarities, and perhaps if it would be interesting to do research, perhaps religions were sort of an early form of political structure that was overextended and just outlived its usefulness. So that's an interesting question.
I think the differentiation that I noticed the most is supernatural claims. And I don't know of any political ideologies that pass the buck off to a either non-living entity or to a divine entity, with the exception of North Korea, where the president is still considered Kim Il-sung, who died decades ago, but he's seen as kind of a deity, and that's kind of where they cross paths. But most other political institutions,
but that's current though. Like if you look in ancient times, perhaps they were able to use a deity as a form of political power.
Well, yeah, theocracies are a form of government.
Exactly, but we sort of evolved out of it into new forms of political power, and religion outlived its usefulness in that realm, but still kind of held on for other ideological or personal reasons. It's an interesting question.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is, isn't it more likely that God is just a representation of the pinnacle of the male dominance hierarchy rather than being some supernatural entity? It sounds like a Jordan Peterson thing where.
Oh my God, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. Oh my God, we're starting to think of like we can't hang out anymore. Yeah,
Quick,
but
genetically modify yourself.
Because Peterson says that they're all just hierarchies of like the pinnacle of human characteristics, right? So, most kind, the most powerful, most this, the most that.
The maximally powerful?
Yeah, maximally, yeah.
I think it's more likely just, there was ancient civilizations who, my God's better than your God, until eventually it became infinity lock.
Yeah, I'd have to go with that, honestly.
Yeah.
I wish I could genetically modify myself to have Peterson's laugh. Have you guys heard Jordan Peterson laugh? Not to change the subject, but it's pretty crucial to our conversation.
He laughs.
Yes, his laugh is. I'm not sure if it's like creepy or if it's adorable.
I always thought he just talked like this.
I stumbled across Creationist Cat's Christmas special yesterday, and he has Jordan Peterson in it, and so he animated the mouth, and then he did like a Kermit the Frog voice. It's hilarious. You gotta watch it.
His laugh is like really raspy, but it also his voice like cracks when he laughs, and so he's like if SpongeBob smoked for a long time. It's like what baby Kurt Cobain sounded like.
Oh my
So
God.
I have a complex question here, or more complex one from Classical Theist. Yeah. So it says, to what extent has the distinction between classical theism, the view of God as pure being composed of no parts, are utterly unchangeable, etc., and theistic personalism, the view of God as a complex, disembodied watchmaker, characterizes by modern apologists like William Lane Craig, altered and or deepened your understanding of theism as such, especially in light of the fact that Christianity, historically, from the early church fathers through Augustine and Aquinas, and currently enshrined in the official doctrine of the Catholic, Orthodox, and High Church Protestant dominations, has adhered to the form and not the latter? And if not, why not? Since the distinction is quite categorical and substantial. So basically, I think he's saying, if I could condense it down, would be that has my run-in with classical theism changed my view of God, or at least the way that some people argue it, compared to the way somebody like Ken Ham might argue for God. And I would say, yeah, I've actually started reading some of Thomas's stuff, so I assume that's going to change my outlook on some of these arguments. I don't know if any of you guys have run across classical theism.
I mean, I think the only enlightenment that I've felt there is that maybe more people believe that than I previously thought. Otherwise, I don't necessarily see evidence for that. So it's not that it convinces me that God is more likely or something like that. Yeah,
it's just a new way of arguing it. Like it's a new angle that I hadn't really. I ran into parts of it. I mean, like the unmoved mover and stuff like that, but I hadn't run into the entire thing kind of condensed into one.
Yeah, and my ability to deal with theism at this point is largely, it's got to be evidence based. Like for me, no argument, no matter how sound, is probably ever going to convince me of anything again without some evidence to back it up. So it's shuffling the deck on the Titanic as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'd have to say oh wow, I just realized without even acknowledging it, I was about to say I'm in the same boat. After that, there you go. After that Titanic reference, but yeah, I have to agree with that.
All right, I think this one's kind of directed at me. It says, "Do you have any pets?" You don't need to be specific if you want to. Yeah, I have two. I have a Chihuahua named Duke, which was my fiance's before we met, and I have a dog named Dexter, who is a golden lab, and they're both awesome. But my lab's
Dexter.
Yeah. So earlier when you referenced Dexter on Twitter, were you talking about your dog? And
no. I was talking about the TV show.
It's a weird comparison between Paul and a dog.
Yeah, no, he was definitely comparing him to a serial killer. That's 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Ever since I saw that picture of him, like all like intense and stuff, and then I saw him again. The next time I saw him was in a stream, and he was sick. And he had that same look.
Is your dog?
And I was like, I don't think this look ever leaves.
That's how I always look. The leave me a fuck alone look works really well for me.
Yeah, that's my life. That's my life all day, every day.
Looks like he's gonna eat you or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I just live in terror. I just live in fear. I just cower in the corner all day. That's all I do.
He's gonna start calling him Cannibal Paul or something.
I'm high functioning.
This one's directed at me too. It says, "How's the wife and kids?" I don't have kids, and I don't have a wife. I have a fiance, but my fiance is doing well. She's in Ottawa right now, so she comes back tomorrow.
I take it Ottawa is part of Canada for those of us who.
It's the capital.
It's the capital of Canada.
For those of us who care about Maine America, real America.
Oh my God! Wow.
Who invited this guy?
I know, right?
Hey, GC, you know that I'll give Canada as much shit as I can. Just for Canada.
We're buried under snow. We don't need any more. Come on. All right. So this one's to all of us. Is the skeptic atheist community becoming too homogeneously white, cis, straight male? Is there any merit to that criticism? And can steps be taken to have a more inclusive community?
No. I am decidedly not male, but sure.
Well, it's interesting that the use of the word becoming, because it feels like the further in the past you go, the more cis and male it was.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Like, even if it is perhaps still overrepresented by white males, the trend is the opposite. So I don't know. That's what I'm observing anyway.
Well, I think one thing I would say is you ask, is it becoming too cis, straight, white? I mean, if we answer yes, what would that imply about our intentions as far as a change in the community? Or is that asking us, what we need to do about it? As in, some of us who are cis, straight, white, don't need to be speaking about it? Or are you saying that, maybe we need to promote people who haven't necessarily gotten their voices out there who are not that? I think that's maybe the underlying issue of the question. I mean, because undeniably there are a lot of, and I think further you go back there, it's basically the majority is white and male. But where we go from there is, I would say, is just regardless of what your identity is, spreading it regardless, and eventually people who are basically minorities will likely catch on as well, and then we respect what they have to say as much as what we have to say. Is that is that a good answer?
I guess I could say something maybe. Like, I'm not a white male, and I don't perceive there as being any barriers in entering the community. I mean, I'm here speaking to people now, and I don't feel like I had to jump over any hurdles to be here in order to be able to have my voice, or to be in, and I have lots of opportunities to enter a lot of discussions in public forums, and I've thrown my hat into the ring. I don't even have a YouTube channel. I just had an interest in entering the public dialogue, and so I did. There isn't a barrier. So to suggest that just because this community seems to be populated by what you would say is, I guess, cis white males, that doesn't speak towards anybody being oppressed out of this community. If anything, I would say, if you feel like you're getting that impression because these types of questions are being asked, and that the questions being asked is giving you that impression, then I would suggest that you throw your hat in, come forward, and you will find a lot of welcoming people who are ready to hear your voice and help elevate you. So
Well,
I'm not
I
sure.
think there are quite a few on even YouTube that are females. I mean, there's
Certainly.
Jacqueline Glenn,
Rachel?
Rachel Oates, Zoe Does Life talks about atheism.
Bionic Dance.
Bionic Dance, yeah, who definitely breaks the cis part as well. Yeah, there's some smaller channels that are coming up. Like there's one that I want to be featuring called Anti Ordinary. So yeah, I think.
And go watch all of my Ham and Egg News that guest starred Morgan. She's amazing. And get her back.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Like my skin color has nothing to do with whether I'm an atheist or not. So I don't understand like why it would matter.
Meta.
Meta, yeah.
Well, can I just add though that I do think that the atheist community, and this is just after going to dozens of different conferences and engaging in tons of different local groups and stuff, it does seem a little bit more oriented towards, or it seems like there's a stronger composition of white, particularly older males. But the question that I have is, why is that the case? And it's like Shannon said, I don't think that it's because other people are being excluded out of it. It's not that there's, something happening from within the atheist community that's, pushing out anyone who's different. I think it's more that you look at the demographics. If you're Black, you're already a minority. If you're a Black atheist, you're a minority within a minority. Your entire culture, your entire family is overwhelmingly Christian. It's extremely hard to turn your back on that or walk away from it. There's huge social pressures. The African American community is centered around the church oftentimes. And I know that's a generalization, but it can be much more difficult. Hispanic communities, it's oftentimes the same thing, only, Roman Catholic rather than, Baptist or some flavor of Protestantism. So, I don't necessarily think it's that the atheist community is pushing them out so much as their own demographics might be pulling them back in. As far as females go, I mean, you could get into, the psychology behind it, the psychological differences between males and females. Is it more difficult to go against the grain if you're, more, and I know I'm going to get some shit for this. I know that not every male and every female is the same. But I have noticed that a lot of times if you're like an atheist YouTuber and you're a female, the kind of comments and the kind of reactions that you get are so often it'll be things like, flash your tits, you're ugly, why is your face out here? And it's either attacks on the person or something derogatory. And if you don't have absolute nerves of steel to just kind of brush it off and keep going, then I would imagine it would be a lot more difficult. And for me, I'm not I'm not very emotional. I'm more of a stoic. Like I choose which fucks I want to give, but I'm very selective about those.
I like that.
But I don't think that that's exclusively a male thing, but I do think that men do tend to be a little bit less emotional in that regard.
It's not exclusively a male thing. And I'm not certain that it's rare in females either. I mean, I go and have difficult my thing isn't really making YouTube videos. I go and seek out difficult discussions. So I go on streams like this and I go on other people's channels and I do what I can to have dialogue with people. But because I'm female and because I'm, I guess, of a certain age, and I suppose I could be considered as, at least moderately attractive.
Hells yeah.
False bias. That opens me up to to a certain degree not being taken seriously or being objectified. And I've literally on a stream been asked about my boobs while I was in a discussion with somebody that I thought was serious. So those are things that do happen to all of us, but you need to be able to just like when I was asked that question, for example, when he asked me, "Hey Shannon, how come I can't see your boobs?" I said, or I bet if I saw your boobs, they'd be nice. I said, I guess I should say thank you, but I'm not certain how relevant that is to the conversation. Can we get back to the point? You have to be able to brush past those things. If you want to enter the discussion, that's just the reality of being a woman in the world. but men will come up against things as well. That's a unique type of wall that you're going to come up against as a woman. But that doesn't mean that there aren't also walls for men. And if you're afraid to try to climb them, then you don't have anybody to blame but yourself for not entering the ring, because you have to be able to push past it. If you want your voice to be heard in the public discourse, you have to be able to push past all kinds of dissent, especially in difficult discussions. So I guess my advice would be, don't allow yourself to be a victim of those types of things, because they're irrelevant. They're not relevant.
I will say that I watch a lot of Rachel Oates, and I follow her on Twitter, and some of the comments she puts up are pretty bad. I mean, I get bad comments, but they're usually of a different type, right? Like, they're not about
nobody cares about your boobs.
Nobody cares about my boobs. They might if they could see them. I mean, they're pretty hot, but but I mean, like, if you look at, say, like, GM's comment section, it looks very different from Rachel's in some respects, right?
Yeah, no, the attacks, quote unquote, I get are basically all my position. And if they're not about my position, then they're only about the parts of my body that you can see. Like, someone will say that my hair looks stupid, or like I have a zit or something. And maybe both of those things are true, but they're not going on and like some of the horrible hate comments that Rachel gets, saying that, like, they know that she's a man, and calling her all these horrible, like, anti-gay slurs, basically, and is going on and on about how, like, ugly she is or something like that. And you're talking about parts of her body that are not on camera. That never happens to me. And so, yeah, I think that's totally valid. The negative comments I get are ones that I am basically inviting by voicing my opinion. And Rachel, apparently people think that she's inviting that by appearing on camera at all, but apparently they don't think that with me. It's just ridiculous.
Well, yeah, but GMS and Thomas, you both get fan clubs. You have your own fan clubs.
Yeah, but can I ask you, GM, do you ever have, like, how do you feel if someone just were to walk up to you and be like, "Hey, dude, you're fat"?
I mean,
like, would it scathe you at all?
No.
Shannon, how would you feel if someone walked up to you and said, "Shannon, you're fat"?
I don't think I'd feel anything about it, really. Maybe I'm unique. Because
I had two sisters and a mom, and as well as, a ex-wife and other, who I knew, oftentimes were very sensitive about their looks.
Right, because you're scrutinized constantly. That is fair. You are. You, as a female, you are, to a certain degree, expected to take care in your appearance at a higher level. Like, you're expected to really care about
like,
it.
GM, if someone wants to, if they hate your videos and they hate your content and they want to go after you in some way, most likely they're going to try to find whatever they think will do the most damage and hurt the most. And I think with female channels, oftentimes that's what they attack.
So do you think that that's because they think that that's what would hurt us the most? Is saying, I don't think you're pretty.
Well, yeah, why else would they do it?
Well, you know what? Then they're stupid, because I would rather have somebody tell me that I don't think that you're smart than have somebody, if somebody tells me I don't think you're pretty, I think to myself, okay, so if somebody says I challenge your idea, then I'm more interested. So that's ridiculous. That's foolish. That's a foolish way to come at people. That to me, that tells me that you don't have an argument. If all you can do is attack my appearance, then you have either you don't understand what I said, or you don't have anything that can counter it.
I think that pretty well nails it. But
fair enough. All right, let's go to the next question. So why did you decide to start up a channel to get your message around, unlike most atheists or agnostic atheists who prefer to remain passive? Have you ever felt afraid of rejection from friends or family because of your beliefs? If so, have you ever confronted them about your religion? And as a person who has remained quiet with my more devout family members, do you have any advice on whether or not one should make their beliefs known? And on the off chance you have a more religious YouTuber on, I get he's gone, so I'm not gonna read that part. But for me, why did I start up a channel? Because I think it's an important topic, and one that is at the time, like right now, I feel, or when I started anyway, a year ago, I felt like nobody was really talking about it anymore. And I wanted to talk about it, but I wanted to also do it in a way that I thought religious people would be able to connect with as well, which was my main goal. And I'm not a passive person, so I don't really remain passive on many things. And I'm not afraid of rejection from friends or family. I'm just not built that way. I would just be like, all right, well then, get lost. Unless it was like maybe my mom or something, which I know she wouldn't do that. So that's my answer. How about you guys?
I mean, one of the reasons I started my channel is because, I mean, first of all, I didn't have an outlet for all the things I was thinking. And this is basically an outlet. And like I've tweeted recently, kind of all the atheist groups around me are all 50 to 60 plus white men, basically. And so it's like they want to have dinner and then move on. And so I wanted to talk to people that were a little bit more engaged in this kind of thing. But I wanted people to realize that alternative medicine and religion require the same kind of lack of critical thinking skills and the same kind of reliance on cognitive biases to be believed. And what was the other part of the question?
Yeah. Do you fear rejection from your friends or family?
I don't really fear my own rejection. I fear my wife's rejection more. I mean, I kind of care about her well-being more so than my own. And so it's no one that knows would blame her at all for anything. But if more people did know, it would come back to bite her a lot more. And by all that, I mean to say that my parents know, and that's about it. You guys and my parents. And yeah, so if anyone else knew, I wouldn't really fear for losing all of my friends, because I can make more friends, and it's always awesome to, be able to talk to you guys. But I'm not sure whether or not, it would affect my wife more harshly. And so that's what I would fear more specifically. Eventually it's all coming out. I mean, we've kind of figured that's probably going to be in a little over a year.
I think a lot of people know that I started my channel because my children are currently young Earth creationists, and partially because I raised them that way. But since coming out, they're not willing to talk to me about it. We have a good relationship, with the exception of their unwillingness to talk to me about matters of religion or science. And I think other people know that I've had some health things in my life that have made me not sure how long I would be around. So my YouTube channel was literally my wanting to put into video for them what I would like to talk about for them once they are eventually comfortable about it. So that's partially why my channel is so geared to Christians, because it's geared specifically to 3 Christians who I know. And as for, do I fear losing anything? No, I lost it all already. It did happen. I almost, everyone in my life, from work colleagues to friends to family, were theists, and few of them stuck by me. Those who have, I continue to have an amazing relationship with. And I felt very blessed over Christmas, despite the fact that I don't agree with the people in the room, that the people in the room accepted me. But I did lose a lot of friends, and in a way that kind of showed me who my real friends were. So in a way, I didn't really fear that.
Fair enough. All right. So Pe asks if there was, he rephrases it, so I'll just read the rephrase. Is there a reason to believe in a God which doesn't end in a personal gain from doing so? My answer would be yeah. I mean, if there was a God and it existed, I'd want to know, even if he didn't really do anything for me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, because you know, I believe things that don't really give me much personal gain other than having a consistent view of reality, maybe. You know, like there are cows in a field right outside my apartment right now, and I acknowledge that, and that seems about as impactful. You know, that doesn't really do anything for me, but I do claim to know that. Is that applicable? Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. What about you, Thomas?
Can you repeat the question?
If is there a reason to believe in a God which doesn't end in a personal gain from doing so?
If it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's my answer. If it's true, yeah. You know, because it's reality. If it's not true, then no. But I mean, it kind of comes down to, like, we can't really choose what we believe. And so I think it's a bit of a weird question. You know, if I put a gun to your head and I say, hey, you know, I'm going to blow your brains out if you don't right now believe that your brother's a pizza. Well, you know, you can't choose to suddenly believe that your brother's a pizza. You can say you do, but you're lying. So, you know, yeah, there's reasons to pretend that you believe that a God exists that might be beneficial to you. But, you know, you can't suddenly choose to believe. So, you know, if I know as a matter of fact that a God doesn't exist, and there's, you know, even if there is a beneficial reason to believe it, you know, maybe it makes me feel better, maybe it makes me less stressful, which makes me live longer, or you know, have better social cohesion with groups around me. Whatever the case may be, I can't choose to believe that if I don't believe it. You know, as far as, you know, if a God exists and there's no benefit whatsoever in believing it, but there's still a plethora of evidence that supports that claim, then yeah, that's still a good reason to believe it if it's actually true. That was long-winded, but
I have to agree, though.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's go to the next one. Why are there atheists that support religious values?
I feel like that's hard to answer without defining religious values.
Oh, I got into a debate about that yesterday, literally, with Friended Forever. And he was supporting religion as a necessary institution. He argued that it had intrinsic value from an evolutionary perspective because it served utility for people who needed guidance and a sense of community that wouldn't be able to find it elsewhere.
I agree with everything up until that wouldn't be able to find it elsewhere part.
Which is exactly what I said. Like, why can't it be replaced with something else? Like, for me, for example, I was ardently religious, and it wasn't necessarily easy for me to do it because there's not already that scaffolding built within society for somebody who is an atheist to have. I mean, we don't have meetings once a week so that we can all get together at a place of, in religious cases, it's worship, but we can't all get together. You know, like that sense of community, that's something that's slightly lacking, but you find it elsewhere. You replace it, and it might be a little bit more difficult initially if you are an atheist, but it's replaced. And also, I no longer have something external to me dictating to me how I'm supposed to make my decisions. So it's worth the difficulty it took me to replace those things so that I could have that freedom. So that's what I was arguing. And he's actually an atheist, which was what was baffled. Well, you know Friended, GC, you know Friended.
Yeah, I had the same debate with him, actually, with Morley Gray.
Oh,
me and
you
Morley
did?
Gray and Friended. Yeah.
That's 2-on-1.
Yeah. I've had that whole discussion with him on Twitter and then off Twitter, and I don't agree with him. But at least where I live, and I could see this isn't the case in all places, but there is, like, not atheist clubs, but I mean, there's I forget what they're called. I've never been to one, but I see
like
the
skeptics in the pub, like the CFI events, like
something like that. I don't think they call themselves skeptics, but it's basically like, and there's humanist clubs. I know that, and there's also like you can go to Unitarian churches, which don't necessarily believe in God, but if you just want to do the rituals and stuff like that, you can do that there.
You're in a major city.
They welcome atheists.
If you guys check out,
that's what I mean.
I put together a resource on my website, holykoolaid.com/atheist-community. And there's literally like a dozen different tools there that you can find, like Sunday Assembly, Oasis, which are both like humanist kind of church alternatives. There's Skeptics in the Pub. Atheist Republic has a bunch of consulates. There's atheist meetups, and there's tons and tons of tools to find all this stuff. So it's not like there isn't a community that's an alternative. It's not like these groups aren't just exploding and springing up left and right. They're out there. It's just a matter of getting involved and, you know, making that the alternative.
Right. Here's the thing, though. I did look at yours actually, and the difficulty is, if you're in a rural community, and rural communities are where religions are most prevalent and predominant, those aren't popping up out here where you're 40 minutes away from a city center. In a city center where it's going to be more secular, of course, there's going to be a population base that allows for that, because those people are going to find each other somehow and create a group and be able to put it out there. It's not as easy if you're a member of a rural community, which a significant amount of people are.
But that'll come with time. You know,
yes,
I mean, rural communities are always the last places to get anything, whether it's a technological development, fast internet access. You know, you don't have a whole lot out in the country.
Right, but we're out here. We exist.
Well, yeah. I'm not trying to denigrate people who choose to live in the country. I'm just saying that that's kind of comes with the territory of living away from big societies.
Right.
Is that you don't necessarily have all the benefits that come with living close to culture and society.
Which was part of his argument, I think, which is why I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, is that, you know, there's not always that alternative. And what happens when you take that away from somebody and they don't have an alternative? Because there are alternatives, granted. I mean, I found some, and I'll travel to them, and I've found a community here. However, if I hadn't had the wherewithal to do that, it would have been a more difficult transition, or it would have been a transition that maybe I wouldn't have undertaken.
I guess what I'm getting at is you could make the same exact argument for, you know, hey, I'm in the States and I can't find a Hindu community near me. Well, sure. But you could say that, you know, Hinduism also provides, you know, that same exact, and I think Friended Forever, as well as Jonathan Haidt, who he seems to quote a lot.
Oh, you are familiar. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But he would make the same argument that, you know, yeah, Hinduism is also, you know, an alternative to provide, you know, social cohesion and collective effervescence and oneness and, you know, community and stuff. But you could make the same exact argument that, yeah, in rural communities, you might not be able to find a Hindu group in, you know, the middle of Nebraska. You know, but that doesn't mean that it's not an alternative. It doesn't mean that, you know, if you did have that group instead of, if all of a sudden America was 100% Hindu, that it wouldn't make for an alternative. And that's what I would argue with secular groups.
Okay. No, that's fair.
Yeah. I also wonder, though, sometimes whether whether certain kinds of personalities are drawn to being atheists. Like, a lot of atheists that I talk to, and of course this isn't a scientific thing, like I have no way of doing that, but just from my perspective, most atheists that I talk to are kind of like, they're not into groups, they're not into doing that kind of thing. They'd rather just kind of, like me, I'm like that, where I would rather avoid the group than actually go to that place. So I don't know if that maybe plays a role in how many gathering places there are for people that don't believe. I don't know.
So you think people who gravitate towards atheism or deconvert to atheism or are natural atheists tend to be more
insular,
individual and insular, and kind of aren't as prone to requiring?
Yeah, introverted. Yeah, introverted. I don't know. I'm not saying I think that's the case. I'm just saying a lot of atheists that I talk to have those kinds of traits, right? So
that makes me wonder, though, if that means that those types of people don't mind breaking away. And it makes me wonder if there are people who don't feel like they can break, maybe who are mentally atheists, but still require that group membership. So go through the motions.
I could see that.
I knew a lot of people in church who they didn't necessarily believe in any of it. And, they would say, well, I'm kind of agnostic on this, but they continue to go to church, and they were cultural Christians. They were social Christians because they were purely there for the community. And I think once we provide those alternatives and destigmatize atheism, that those numbers are likely to, like, the number of people in churches will go down, and the communities will really start to take off.
Well, I also know
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say, I also know that like a while ago, like a long time ago, I wrote a piece about spirituality and stuff, and almost every time you bring up like something like spirituality or the notion that we're talking about now with gatherings and stuff, you get a large percentage of atheists that say, well, that will like, say in the comment section, like, we don't need that. That's just like being like a religion. I did that. I wanted to get away from religion. So that's why a part of me kind of thinks that, there's certain, personality traits that might, not all atheists, obviously, but I mean, there might be a large population of them, a larger population than normal.
What are y'all's thoughts on spirituality in terms of not a supernatural type, but more of a kind of mindfulness and presence, sort of like if any of you have read Waking Up by Sam Harris?
Yeah.
I think it's legitimate, but I think there needs to be a different word to describe it because there's just too much baggage with spirituality. If there's any usefulness to the word spirituality, it's as a vehicle to get someone who requires spirituality, but doesn't necessarily require something that's supernatural.
Yeah, because they're interconnected in people's thoughts.
So you could say, I'm mindful, but not religious.
I guess you could,
You heard it here first.
I think like my wife and I really describe ourselves as introspective. And that's something that we see. I mean, when we're trying to make friends, if we see that someone's not particularly introspective, we have a hard time really connecting with them because my wife and I, both have to figure out how not to overthink, how not to, just not overthink. We've always been kind of critical thinkers, and we're both basically introverted. And so, and I think that that's something that has, when I discovered the concept of mindfulness, via Sam Harris, I was like, and I never thought that was in any way spiritual, because my concept of spirituality that I was raised with had nothing to do with that. And because it was just very narrow frame. So you can be mindful but not religious, but I think the word that my wife and I have used for a while has been introspective, but it basically means the same thing as being mindful. Maybe it's expanded a little bit, but yeah.
Okay, so let's do the next one. So there's dealing with Christians. I've noticed a very serious push towards liberalism and acceptance. Do you think that's something that should be encouraged? And if so, how would you approach that from an anti-theist position? I don't know how many of you are anti-theists.
I mean, I know, like, Thomas, you consider yourself an anti-theist, and I would.
I don't like the term anti-theist because it implies anti-theist rather than anti-theism.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I rarely use it because of that, but I do get down with the concept for sure.
Because people hear anti-theist and they think that you're against religious people.
Yeah.
They immediately think that, and then they attribute everything that's affiliated with that bias in their mind directly to you, and it kind of shuts them down from listening to what you have to say logically and with any sort of measure, because immediately they're attributing you to somebody who's bigoted towards an entire group of people, as opposed to somebody who's trying to take a real skeptical and critical look at ideas. And those two things are very different.
Well, then they must not listen to me at all, because I'm totally an anti-theist.
Are you talking?
Yeah, I'm totally in with the anti-theist. I think it needs to be used more myself, and I'm fine with saying that I'm against people, because I am. I am against their idea. Like, I'm not against them as people, but I'm against their ideas. Just like,
Right.
you know, I think of it like this: if you're a Republican and you're against Democrats, right? So you're an anti-Democrat. You would be against a Democrat in certain arenas, right? Like in certain areas, if you were discussing that thing, you would be against them. I'm not saying that you're going to go over there and try to hatchet them or something, but
that's polarizing though. Like, what if you can be a Republican and a Democrat, or and you could be a member of the PC party or a liberal, and you can still cross the floor and find some common ground on.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm just saying in those specific arenas, like when it comes to religion, I'm not talking, and even not all parts of religion. Like that doesn't mean I can't agree or disagree with somebody that's really. I mean, I had talked to Max, right, and I talked to other religious people.
And GC, I lived in California, and certainly to say you were a Republican was to take your safety in your own hands.
Well, it might have been a bad example, but I could have used like anti-homeopathy or something like that, right? Like something that's more cut and dry, because that's kind of how I view religion, to be more cut and dry than Republican versus Democrat.
I know that words oftentimes, especially if we're trying to win people over, there's so much psychological baggage that is assigned to certain words. And if I talk to a religious person, I say, yeah, I really don't like religion, almost 9 times out of 10, I get the religious person to say, oh, I don't like religion either. I just like this and this about whatever religious belief they have. And whereas if I say like, I'm an anti-theist, they'll be like, well, why do you hate Christians so bad? What did they ever do to you? And it kind of is already, I'm shooting myself in the foot just by choosing my word choice poorly.
Maybe that's why I limp. I don't know.
And that's why I worded my Star Wars video the way I did, actually, very specifically. Like, that's the most anti-theist thing I've ever done. But I've had incredibly positive responses from even Christians, because I just talked about it. I just kept saying religion as opposed to theism. So I would agree with Thomas, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm confused by the question. Was it supposed to be that the church is becoming more liberal? Like, because I'm not sure I agree.
Yeah, I don't think. No, I think it's dealing with Christians. I've noticed a very serious push towards liberalism and acceptance. Do you think that's? I think they're saying that maybe churches are becoming more accepting, which I think is true. If you look at it from a historical perspective, right? Like, I mean, you wouldn't find pro-gay churches, or very many of them, very long ago, right? So, but I think that has more to do with secularism than it does with Christianity. But that's just.
I would like to say that it's good that they're becoming more accepting, because I would say that they probably are. I mean, when I was a little kid, when I was in elementary school, if someone came into the church and said that they were gay, they would be like, you need to be escorted out of the building. Or, what are you trying to sabotage our service or something? And now it would be more like, oh, well, you're just a little lost. Or someone might be like, well, we don't actually address the gay question here, but we do show you the love of Christ. I think that's becoming more normal, especially among like my generation that are religious. But I would like to say that's good, but I also think that I would require acceptance being made or being had for the right reasons. Someone should be, if someone is being accepting of gay people because they think that if they're more accepting, then that actually is going to be better to convert them, and that they have even a stronger idea that they're going to be converted if they're accepting versus if they really strongly reject them. If they have that kind of idea and that's why they should accept them, I don't really know that that's good. But if a Christian says, well, being gay is just not wrong, then I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. Because I think it kind of comes back to bite us sometimes if we believe maybe the right conclusion, or we act in a certain way, but for the time being, but we don't necessarily have good reasons for why we actually think something. Because ultimately, the way that you go about enacting what you believe is going to be different if your reasons for reaching the same conclusion are different than maybe someone else's. It has to be good reasons for a good conclusion, not bad reasons for a good conclusion.
Well, you'll never see me argue against secular reformation of the church. And if you were to ask, what is the greatest threat to Enlightenment values, a good 200 years ago, it would have been the Catholic Church. You go back 400 years and 500 years, and you have the Inquisition, and you have all kinds of horrible torture that's done to people who speak out against religious institutions. So yeah, nowadays it's so much easier. Even 60 years ago, 70 years ago, the debate was over, is it okay to like our IVF, in vitro fertilization, like, is that okay? Nowadays almost every single church is fine with it. Where the gay question we're making huge strides on, stem cells we're making huge strides on, but it's still religion that is slowing down the overall machine. It's slowing down progress, and it does allow for these offshoots and these radical groups. Right now, if you were to ask me what's the biggest threat to secularism and to scientific progress, I would have to say Islam. And I'm not going to argue against the reformation of Islam, but I do think that abandoning it altogether and spreading doubt is probably a better alternative. I had a long interview with Armin Navabi about this, and I think he's right. If you can actually get people to leave their faith rather than just make slight little changes and little tweaks and reforms here and there, then I think that it's the way to go.
Especially considering that they're going to raise their children in a faith, and there's no guarantee that those children, they have access to the same original doctrines. So whatever tweaks you made, that doesn't necessarily transfer. It doesn't stand that if you're going to educate somebody else in the same faith, that they're going to follow through with the same tweaks you made to that doctrine. They may be exposed to other people that are able to convince them otherwise. And,
exactly. We still have
perpetuating a cycle, even if you change it on an individual level so that it's not quite as bad for you in this instance. You're perpetuating a continuing cycle, so the problem's never solved.
Yeah, why make it a little bit more enlightened when you could go all the way? You're still, you're always going to have, if you have a book that claims to be the perfect, unalterable final revelation of God, and this book says, that homosexuals should be put to death, then of course you're going to have the Fred Phelpses of the world that spring up, and, the Westboro Baptist Church and radical groups like ISIS that, are interpreting their book literally because it says to. Now, their parents might have been liberals. Their parents might have been moderates, some of them at least. But that doesn't stop, until you actually replace it with a, reason-based system based in critical thinking. You're always going to have that.
Certainly. And you're always open up to risk that somebody's going to revert, or somebody's going to become entrenched in the social system that is surrounding it, and I guess get into the air quotes wrong crowd that's interpreting it the more dangerous way. Like, I just really believe that I'm with Armin on that. If you have a choice between reason and indoctrination, like, pick reason. If you know that there's something fallible about the system that you exist within, if you can look at it and say, okay, I recognize that this is fallible, and there's a lot of problems with it that I can't reconcile with my own internal morality or logic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak my perspective on this so that I can still keep it. I mean, you have to really look at that and think to yourself, why am I even doing that? I'm changing everything about a tenet that's supposed to be sacred just so that I can still hold on to it. Maybe it's not sacred. Maybe there's a better way.
Fair enough. Okay, so I tried to ask Sam in the chat because he's been asking the entire time about his question, but he's asked so many questions in my community tab, I don't know which one to go with. I don't know. He keeps talking about the CTMU, which shows that the laws of physics are the will of God and scientific knowledge is theological knowledge. And all previous religions are just man's understanding of God at that time. The CTMU is the final religion, and his paper online proves the reality of the omni-traits of God. So I don't know. Have any of you heard of the CTMU?
What's it stand for?
I don't know.
I think it's the cognitive model of universal. Oh, I read it earlier. Cognitive model of universal something. He wrote earlier that he did a mathematical model that proved the existence of God and the Big Bang. That's all I know.
Literally all I'm getting on when I Google it is the cell transmission model.
Yeah, he means the cognitive theoretical model of the universe.
Oh, there you are. There you go. Paul found it.
But no, I don't know anything about it.
Paul, explain it to us.
Well,
right now.
I like in the one question, he says at the end, so answer that one, Godless Cranium, what are you really made of? So he says it's that God is dead. Is more accurately, mankind is creating an increasingly complex and mechanized world, and the essence of complexity and mechanism is not faith but logic. So the time for a logical approach to theology is nigh. Accordingly, the CTMU does not begin with a preconceived definition of God. Rather, it determines within the extended logical structure of reality how the properties most often attributed to God are logically related, reserving the title for the relationship actually deduced. So answer that one, Godless Cranium. I don't know. I don't really see a question there. You're just making assertions. And I'm not sure how you can begin talking about a God without a definition of God. I don't understand that either. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm
not sure that this. I don't really know anything about the CTMU, but I really don't think it's having a major impact in philosophical or physics circles or scientific circles, because it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page dedicated to it, and it redirects to the founder, and it looks kind of like a self-made Wikipedia page. Like it says, occupation is intellectual, and he's known for the man with one of the highest known IQs.
Oh.
Oh my God. That's an occupation? Oh man, I get the wrong degree.
This sounds, if I can toot my own horn, this sounds like it might be cargo cult science.
Weird, because your picture on that Wikipedia page.
I'm sorry, Sam, but if you ask a question for the next time I do a stream, send it to me on Twitter or something. I'll try it. If it's more precise and you explain your stuff, I'll try to answer it. I don't know what else to say. So the next one,
I'm not saying it doesn't have any merit. I'm just a little bit skeptical. Just,
yeah, I just don't know what the question is, and I don't understand what he's like. There's like 12 different things that he posted. I can't read them all, so I don't know.
I bet the founder watches Rick and Morty, having that high IQ.
Yeah. So this one says a bit off subject, but what did you think to the new Star Wars film? I haven't seen it, so
yeah, me
I don't
either.
know how good it is.
Where's Paul?
I want to see it though.
I saw it.
What did you like it?
I did, and I didn't. I don't like the villain, but I mean, if you've seen the Force Awakens, you're already familiar with the main bad guy, Kylo Ren. He just seems kind of like a pouty emo teenager, but it's really hard for me to be, feel threatened or intimidated. But I don't know. I thought it's much better than 1, 2, and 3 than Jar Jar Binks. I liked Rogue One a little bit better.
Wow.
Oh no.
Yeah, you better watch out. I insulted the first three. Well, the first three, not chronologically, but and I don't know if Paul and I are even on the same ground that we were before I insulted it. So you better watch out.
No, it was just.
Is he a Jar Jar fan?
Well,
No,
it was my job to work on those movies.
What?
Yeah, I worked on episode 1, 2, and 3.
What position though?
I was in charge. Well, yeah, I was in charge of the Lucas Online, so all the online marketing. So,
okay, but so you didn't have a role.
No, and I had a small hand in the script in episode 3, but that was just only. Actually, it was my favorite thing I did there. I got a note from George asking me what dots does he have to connect between 3 and 4 so that he didn't miss any. So that was actually one of my favorite things that I did while I was there. But if anyone wants to know what I thought about Last Jedi, I just put up a video about it. And I think actually it's the most anti-religious film I've ever seen in a mainstream thing. And I really enjoyed those themes, and it's given me a lot of leverage to talk about it with my theist families, because we can talk about the ideas in the Star Wars universe, which is what all great sci-fi does. It gives you a layer of abstraction that lets you actually discuss the ideas without being so personal about it. So it's a great anti-theist film if you're looking for one.
Well, I'm definitely on board then.
Yeah, that's what I love about Star Trek.
Yeah, you're on my team
Yeah.
again. Team Trek.
All right. Well, hey, I gotta head out here, guys.
All right. Thanks for coming, Thomas.
Yeah. Hey, thanks again.
It's
for
too
having
bad.
me. By
It's
the
too
way,
bad. I wanted to ask one more question. I wanted to get everybody's take on, but if you gotta go.
I can ask it real quick. Also,
Okay.
before I go, I want
You
to
answer
say
it first.
massive congrats on hitting 15,000.
Oh, thanks, man.
Oh yeah, congrats, man.
Yeah. This month's been, or last month was pretty good for views and new subscribers. So
Awesome.
thanks to everybody that subscribed. Okay, so this one, I've been asked this one before. I've actually gotten emails about it. So share your opinion on the bakery situation in Oregon and the one in Colorado. I'm not familiar with both, but I guess that's where they're going to court over whether somebody can deny service to gay people. What do you guys think about that?
We'll start with Thomas.
Yeah, we'll start with Thomas.
In principle, I think it's kind of dumb, because if you're a business and like let's say that you're Coca-Cola, and you don't ask someone, or even if you're like a store owner or something, you don't ask someone when they come in, are you a member of the KKK? No, you just sell them a Coke, right? So why should it be any different with cakes if capitalism is blind? It's the one area where it's visible. It's a wedding. If there's something that is crude or obscene or something on the cake, yeah, they should be able to have certain standards of what they will and won't make. As far as whether or not they're legally within their rights to do it, I mean, it's a tough one, because, and I know that I'm going to get shit from both sides on this, but if they deny the person the cake, then I do think that the free market is going to correct it, and they're going to lose a lot of business. There's going to be a lot of negative publicity as bigots and whatnot. Legally, it comes down to if I'm trying to word this in the right way, but like, if you go back 50 years, 60 years, or I guess more than 60 years now to like before the 1960s, where you had, segregated colored only cafes and whatnot, being black is a protected protected class. I think in the same way, being gay should be a protected class. And I don't think that people should be able to be denied service on those grounds. I don't know. At the same time, you have, religious institutions that, or even groups like the KKK, which still have the freedom to organize. They still have freedom of speech. They're bigots, they're hate-filled, but they still have that freedom of assembly and that freedom of, forming groups that express opinions, no matter how revolting. Should a bakery be allowed to do that? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there was a time, like you could argue that there was a time when the free market couldn't have corrected for that, because like if you took your example, a couple hundred years ago, when there was slavery and stuff like that, there wouldn't be enough people that would put pressure on companies to serve black people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but now I think there is, right? I think there is enough pressure. Like if a cake company were to say like we're not serving you, there would be there's a big backlash. So it would cost.
Well, but it depends. If you're in a small town in Alabama, then, and maybe there's only one cake company and you're the only gay couple in town, then no, there isn't. There's not really an alternative.
Yeah.
Also, extrapolate it out though. Here's the thing though. It's in the legal realm now. So if it comes down that, okay, you don't have to serve gay people a wedding cake if you feel like you have a moral objection to it. You don't have to. If that's the verdict that comes down, that extrapolates out. It doesn't just pertain to their right or ability to sell a cake. Now it's any retail environment has the right to put forth that moral objection. How do gay people get groceries? How do gay people get clothes? How to get you have to extrapolate it out. You can't just look at it on the micro level of it's just about them getting a cake, because it's not. It's about somebody being able to say, I have a moral objection to serving you because of who you are.
Have no gays allowed signs.
Right, exactly. So it's not just about a cake. The fact that it is a cake makes it trivial enough that it allows us to have discussions. It allows people, not us, to have discussions about it on a trivial level. But you have to look at the bigger picture. As soon as you say that person was within their rights to not serve you simply because they object to the way you live your life, that opens the door so that others can say, well, he has a moral objection to it. I mean, I sell tables, and I don't really feel like selling you a table in your gay house where you live and be gay. I don't want the table that I lovingly made to be in your house. I grew this produce on my farm, and I don't want this produce to be in a house where it's going to be, in a house that I have a moral objection to the way you live your life. That extrapolates out.
Well, and I think the difference too, you can have a cake company that tells straight couples, if there's something that they object to a particular design, but they do it across the board equally for everyone, they could be like, well, we don't do cakes with nudity on them. We don't do cakes with whatever on them. That's one thing, but saying we won't make you a cake simply because you're a gay couple.
Unacceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard I think it was on another YouTube channel. It might have been Dave Packman, where they were discussing this, and they had a lawyer on, and she was saying that she could make a case that it would be different so if you walked into a cake shop and you saw cakes made on the shelf, right, and you said, okay, I want to buy that, then the company shouldn't be able to say no, right, because the company owner isn't endorsing the marriage by selling you something off the shelf. But if you were to say, get the cake owner to go out there and cater it, then you would be forcing them to service or service something that they didn't endorse. Do you think that changes it at all, Shannon? Would that change your mind at all?
So you have to be is the question whether or not you have to be an active participant in the wedding?
Well, hey, I'm going to let Shannon answer that, but I have to run.
Oh, okay. Bye,
thanks
Thomas.
a lot.
Thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Thomas.
All right, bye.
Later, man.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the question is, if you were a caterer, and as a caterer, you have a moral objection to somebody who is gay getting married, and somebody who is gay has come to you and said to you, I would like to utilize your services. Because you actually have to physically be there, do you have the right to say no? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like if it would change your stance, if there's a difference between if it's on the shelf or if the people had to actually go out to the wedding and service it.
No, that wedding's happening whether or not you're providing that service. You're abstaining from being present is not going to change the fact that it happened. That couple has a legal right to get married. They're going to get married whether you are present or not. You abstaining from that because you have a moral objection is in this case bigotry. It's bigotry. It's absolute bigotry. You are choosing to not take somebody's money because you have an objection to how they lead their life, even though they are leading their life in a fashion that is deemed to be legally and morally acceptable by the society that you exist within. Now, I think that that's a problem. Also, if you're a catering company specifically, perhaps a wedding planner might be better because catering company, you have employees and you'd have to speak for them. So let's say wedding planner. I think if you are going to go into that sort of business, you understand the environment that you exist in, and you understand that these things are going to happen. Gay people are going to get married and are probably going to seek out your services. First off, you're foolish because you're cutting yourself off from a demographic of people that could be utilizing your services, and second, you don't have that right. You don't have that right. And you don't have that right because you're present any more than you have the right to refuse somebody's service because you don't want them to be present in your store. It's the same.
Yeah.
What foolish person isn't? What foolish wedding planner is not going to say yes to a gay wedding? That seems
right.
Turning down a lot of money.
The way that's true. But the way I think about it though is just like if I buy something at Walmart, they're not endorsing my actions. Like, if I'm a serial killer, they're not endorsing my serial killerness, right? Or if I'm doing something that they don't like, right? Like if I'm and I'm not trying to equate homosexuality with before I get in trouble, I'm not equating homosexuality with serial killing. I'm just saying that if you're doing something that somebody else finds, morally wrong, they're not endorsing that action by selling me a table or whatever, right?
So you think you're endorsing somebody's wedding by being the
I don't think so. No. I think the opposite. I think I don't see how selling somebody a service if you're a company is endorsing their actions, right?
Yeah,
I was just playing devil's advocate because somebody asked another hypothetical, if should a Jewish caterer have to cater a Nazi rally?
A Nazi? Oh, no. I think that's different. Because they could be danger. Because they could be in danger? Because Nazis proclaim to want to cause harm to that group of people and have threatened and caused harm to that group of people and proclaim hate speech towards them and speech that is violent in nature, and going to that location and surrounding yourself with that group of people could open you up to be in actual literal physical danger. And I feel like if you can't see the difference between those two things, between having a moral objection to something benign that is in no way going to harm you and having an objection, or I guess you would also still consider it, I suppose, a moral objection to going to a location where you feel that you are in literal physical danger based on a huge history that professes as such and people professing as such, then I don't understand how you can't see how that dichotomy isn't valid. Is that fair?
I think so. I think it just boils down to that being gay isn't a choice or it isn't an ideology. It's just
true. Exactly.
Right. So it's like apples and oranges, right?
For sure.
Comparing two different things. That's how I would think about it. I don't know. This is kind of stuff I like.
Peaceful Nazis. Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. How about peaceful Nazis?
Yeah. I don't know. The only thing that kind of sticks with me in that would be wrong to me is I don't like the idea of the state being able to force people to do things. Right. So I usually tend towards being able to for the market or whatever to kind of correct itself, and so that's the only argument I have or I could have against.
So what would you? Okay, so you think the market should correct itself, but now it's in the legal realm. So
yeah,
once a court says it's okay,
so you'd have to do it piecemeal, right? Yeah, and then you could also extrapolate that, like you said, you could extrapolate that out.
You're creating precedent.
People, right?
Once you're in the legal realm, there's precedent created. So it's outside of the market's realm. As soon as you take it into the court system, like the market isn't.
I'm agreeing.
You're interfering.
I'm agreeing with your conclusion. I'm just saying that if I had to come up with an argument, that's the only one that I can see that makes any kind of sense, is that the government shouldn't be telling people what they can. But the other argument, the counter argument to that is also that the state does tell people what to do all the time, right? I mean, we tell people not to murder people. So
I know.
What's the difference? Yeah. Or not to steal, right? Or whatever it is.
I know. And there's so many things I want to steal. I want to steal so many things. It's not fair.
Yeah. So I don't know. Stick said he was going to come in, so I was going to make it go longer, but I'm not sure.
I think he left the chat.
Yeah. Well, I sent him the Twitter link. So
okay.
let's do one. We'll do one more question. If he doesn't show up, then we'll end it. If he does, then maybe we'll do a couple more. Does that sound okay to you guys?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Thank
works for me.
Okay.
I have church in the morning.
Oh yeah, I bet. I bet.
All right. So Dr. Eggman says, is it possible for atheist, anti-theist to suddenly become a theist on the basis of faith? And if yes, then how? My answer would be yeah. I mean, I can't see why you couldn't.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it doesn't mean that by default anti-theists and atheists are not rational or people. It doesn't mean that they're rational, and that doesn't mean just because they're anti-theists or atheists that they can't make an irrational conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like we discount how much emotions play into things, right? Like if you're getting older and you're starting to think, you want to believe in something, then a lot of times we rationalize things we don't necessarily want to believe in, or we want to believe in them so badly that we kind of rationalize our way there, right? I don't know. Anything's possible though, right? So I'm not sure why you would argue like you can't go from an anti-theist to a theist, because there's lots of examples of people doing that.
Right. Well, that's the reverse of the argument that still drives me bananas, and we talked about earlier. It was like, well, you were, that no Christian could ever change their mind and not become a Christian again. And if they weren't really a Christian. I mean, it's obviously people change their mind all the time for good reasons and bad reasons, which is what we've talked about. But no position is ever so entrenched that it can't be changed.
Yeah.
Even medically or whatever.
This is a good one for Paul and Shannon. If you had a kid and your significant other family would want to baptize or do some other religious mumbo jumbo to the child, would you care? Personally, even if it is harmless, I wouldn't let them do it. It may be harmless overall, but it's the principle of the thing. What do you guys think about that?
Paul, do you want to go first?
We're
both divorced with kids.
Well,
that's why I thought it would be great for you guys.
So it's interesting. When my first child was baptized, I was fully a theist, and it was one of the best days of my life because my oldest son, was baptized. When my daughter, the middle child, was baptized, I was secretly an atheist. So I was seething the entire time, but I went and watched in somewhat of pain. But the third one, he went and got himself baptized in secret and didn't tell me until afterwards. And I figured out that was the worst one of all, because they felt like they had to hide it from me. So I guess I would recommend, if any other parent is in this situation, as we all should, you need to support your child's decisions and independence and whatever they are interested in, even if you're not interested in the thing that they are passionate about. To be the best parent you can be is to support them in whatever decisions they make. And even if we think it's mumbo jumbo, it can be worse to call them out on it and to be an alienating force than to being supportive. So that's all. I guess that would be my advice.
What would it change your answer at all, Paul, if the mother, like say it was a baby, so it was somebody that wasn't able to make up their own mind, but your wife wanted to have the baby?
Interesting. I was a Mennonite, and they were one of the early Anabaptist religions, which were very much against infant baptism. So I was raised all along that infant baptism is just terrible. But actually, right now, I would not care if you go ahead and baptize all the babies. Like, it's so meaningless. It's the baby's unaware. It's not a conscious decision. No one indoctrinated the baby. So if you want to, dip him in water on stage, have at it, I guess.
Is that a different answer, Shannon?
Is that the answer you're expecting?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah.
My son's not baptized. I was very, very specific about the fact that I did not want him baptized. My ex-husband was indifferent, didn't really care one way or the other. His family are devout Christians, and they cared quite a bit. My son is 6 now. My ex-husband and I are divorced, and it has actually been on my mind that, and now that I'm not present all of the time, because my ex-husband and I share custody of my son, because that was the best decision for him, is to allow him to have as much time as possible with both parents. But now that I'm not present all of the time, they are beginning to introduce concepts of religion to him. And that is difficult because I don't know how to parse the issue. It's one of the most difficult things I've encountered, actually. He's recently started talking to me about Jesus and about how people get their heads covered in water. And I do fear that it is something that might be done behind my back, but it's something that I think that I would fight against. If he made the decision himself at an age where I felt that he's 6 now, at an age where I felt he was capable of making the decision, I would support him in it, and I would be in the front row to support him in that decision. But at this time, I would, there's a chance that I would become unpleasant if it was done. So I'm not sure if that's a good answer. That's an honest one.
It's a good answer. So we had 2 questions in the chat that are pretty good. So this one kind of circles back to the cake one, but it says, do you think it would be different if doctors refuse to provide Christians care when they can instead pray to God to get healthy, or if shops deny Christians to shop there? See, I think that's a pretty compelling argument, because the shoe could be on the other foot at some point, right?
Certainly.
And people could be like, well, you're a Christian, so I don't agree with your lifestyle choice, so
yes,
no, I don't want to serve you, right?
Absolutely. I agree. It's a good question.
And then it would be, all of a sudden it would be, well, you're oppressing us.
Yeah. Persecution narrative engaged.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. And then Mr. Spectral Fire said, should circumcision be illegal?
I don't know. My kid's not circumcised, and I don't know about illegal. I wouldn't do it because I couldn't stand the idea of, like, I don't know enough about it. I don't know if there are any medical. I've never had a penis, and I've never thought much about what it would be like to have one. So I have no idea if there are any medical benefits. Somebody once argued to me that there were, and I've never truly looked into it. I spoke to a doctor about it when I had my son, said I didn't want to do it because I couldn't stand the idea of harming him for no reason if there was no benefit. And the doctor said there really is no point in doing it. Just make sure that you clean. I know not to be too graphic. And
how you doing on that?
He can do that himself now. Thank you. But I did a fantastic job for the first 2 years of his life.
What do you think, GM?
I mean, whether or not it should be illegal is a tough one for me. I think Steve from Rationality Rules has a pretty good video on it. If anything, to me, it seems that if it was going to be illegal, it would be really more out of principle than out of a concern for actual harm when the procedure is done successfully, not necessarily factoring in error. Maybe you could make the argument that just having a procedure that is apparently has just a neutral effect, doesn't do anything effectively, does introduce the possibility of there being harm. I mean, because circumcisions do get botched, and that's permanent damage, which is just excruciating. And so I guess if you argued from that standpoint, I could see a good case for it being illegal, but they're also not botched very often. It's really hard to say. I mean, I really maybe I have to plead ignorance on all the issues or all the factors that are involved in the issue. And so I can't really give a judgment. I don't really think that it's morally correct to circumcise a child, but at the same time, like, you know, trying not to give too much information, but all of myself and all of the guys I, you know, basically saw, and this makes me sound odd, but saw naked in college because I had a dorm, community showers. Basically, most of us were circumcised, and it just, we had never once thought that it could be any different. And basically, the guys that were not circumcised were like, "Yeah, I don't think that it's really any different." The
one hesitation I would have, you know, we've all talked about being anti-theists, or to some extent or another, I would still defend that if it's neutral, and it would create an undue hardship for some religions, like if it would unfairly target the religions that see this as very important, that I would be hesitant to. I think I'd want to think twice about it. Even I would stand up for the religious freedom in this case.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I mean, like I said, it's a little bit more complicated than I claim to, you know, comprehend. So
I'm not sure why people think it's neutral, though. I mean, you're cutting off a piece with a lot of nerve endings. I don't know. I don't know what it's like to have one because I am circumcised. But if I could take that back, I would ask to get it taken back, because it's, you know, there's a lot of nerve endings and stuff there that, you know, I wouldn't mind having. So I'm not sure why it would be considered neutral.
Yeah, and I think that's the first valid point to establish whether or not it actually is neutral. And I'd have to review the sources before I'd be able to say on that.
Well, and I certainly, to myself, if you'd have said, well, are you okay with female genital mutilation? I've said, no, absolutely not.
Right.
So, yeah, there's probably double standard that we're all a little ignorant of here.
Yeah, and I think it's also because it's accepted, right? Like one is accepted and one isn't. So I don't see why it would be. I don't see anything ethical but doing. I've looked into some of the research and I haven't seen anything that was like, well, you should get it done because of this, and it was a good reason, right? It was like the only one I found that was even, you know, a little bit persuasive was the cleaning aspect. But you can just, if you actually take the time to clean it properly, then it would be fine. So I'm not sure why you would take that choice away from somebody. I don't know. That's just my thought. So I think
that's a valid arguing point to say that you're taking the choice of that away from someone, and deriving someone of choice on that is immoral. I mean, I think that's a pretty good point to argue from, actually.
Yeah, and also, like, to your point, GM, about you know, the percentage of error, right? Like you're still taking that chance on something that most people consider a cosmetic surgery, right? When that's not needed. So you're still taking that chance with a baby for no apparent reason. And when it goes bad, it goes really bad. So yeah. I don't know. I don't see any really compelling arguments to say that, yeah, we should keep it around. But that's just my opinion. Okay, last question, because Tobisaru has asked it a couple times. What comfort would you provide a dying child without outright lying to them? That's a pretty heavy question.
So I think it would depend on what they believe, first of all.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, like, I guess, yeah, if you didn't want to lie to them, so, you know.
Like, what if they didn't believe? Are we talking about a child who's religious? Or, I mean, I think you can provide comfort in a myriad of ways without referencing religion at all.
Yeah.
I not, or you're talking.
I think it's just like if there's a child and say he has like terminal cancer, and you're an atheist, how would you provide comfort to that person?
Well, certainly one bit of comfort, depending on the sickness of the child, is obviously that their pain will end soon. Like for me, if the child is in pain a lot, that I would say, remember what it was like before you were born. No, like you weren't in pain then. There was no problems then. So you will soon be, again, one of the things to say, but not the only thing to say, would be that you won't have pain anymore. But and then obviously I would be doing everything I could to encourage that child or encourage that kid to be able to live their life as much as they can within the confines of what their treatments are, to be having the most fulfilling, remaining days, weeks, months, years, whatever they can, as all of us should, that they can.
Yeah. And I mean, I haven't been a dying child, but I have received a diagnosis. I did receive a diagnosis as a child that I and everyone else thought that I was dying. And I'm really glad that, it came out the other side on that one. And that diagnosis was found to be a mistake. But yeah, I mean, I was comforted by religion. That's one of the biggest things, was that I was going to be in heaven if I died, and I was going to see my grandma and my grandpa if I died, and all this kind of stuff. But honestly, the things that I remember comforting me the most out of those very vivid and horrifying memories are just my parents always being there for me. And I mean, I honestly remember the sensation of holding my mom's hand more than I remember her telling me that I was going to be in heaven. And I think I care more about that ultimately. Hopefully that's not some kind of bias, just in hindsight applying itself. But I think that showing that child a very active and self-sacrificial love, and doing things that they like, and offering them comforts that they enjoy is, I mean, like just ice cream, things like that. I know that sounds so shallow, but I think to a child, and having been in that situation, that is incredibly meaningful. And I don't think it's something that we can just shirk off. Just providing little menial comforts is not a small thing. It's huge to a child in that situation, if I can speak from experience on that.
Yeah, well, it's the same. I was just reading Cyrus's comment, who said there's no need to lie to them, just comfort them and make their life feel as good as possible while they're around.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of what you said there. I think that kind of nails it, right? I mean, you don't really need to talk about that aspect of it. Unless they really wanted to. But
chat was pretty heavy on ice cream too.
Yeah,
chat was all about ice cream.
I want ice cream now.
Right?
Who doesn't want ice cream? Well, thanks a lot for joining me, guys. It was a lot of fun. I think it was a great talk. I really like the parts about the ethics and stuff. I find that stuff interesting.
Yeah, me too.
But you guys are awesome, and thank you for joining us, and thank you, chat, for chiming in and sending us all your questions. So we'll have to do it again.
Sounds good. Thanks, GC.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me on late.
Always.
Bye, chat.
No worries. All right. Good night, guys.
Bye, guys.